Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto became the Soul King and fell in love with Senjumaru Shutara? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Weight of 1,000 Worlds. The end wasn't a roar, but the silence that followed one. One moment, there was the screaming vortex of Kagaya Otsutsuki's final, desperate attack, an expanding truth-seeking orb meant not just to kill, but to erase. A sphere of absolute nothingness that would consume the dimension, then bleed through to unmake his world. The next moment, there was Naruto Uzumaki, a sun-gold beacon against the encroaching void. Holding it all back, he could feel Sasuke's desperate plea through their shared seal, a raw, frantic surge of power that screamed, "Don't." He felt Sakura's terror, Kakashi's grim acceptance. But they were on the outside of the seal, their power meant to pull the nascent moon together, trapping the rabid goddess for eternity. Naruto was on the inside. He had become the core, the anchor point. Kurama, a roaring inferno within him, threw every last ember of his ancient chakra into the furnace. "It won't be enough, brat," the fox's voice was a gravelly whisper in his soul. Stripped of its usual bravado. "This is it." Naruto's grin was a bloody, cracked mess, but it was there. "Yeah, I know. Just means we gotta push harder. One last time, partner." He didn't just push, he pulled. Instead of fighting the sphere of nothingness, he embraced it, drawing it into himself. It was like swallowing a star and a black hole at the same time. The sage's six paths energy, the life force of the world, met the ultimate expression of its own demise. His body, once so resilient, became the battleground. He saw flashes, the swing set at the academy, Iruka's kind smile. The weight of Jiraiya's hand on his head, the taste of Ichiraku ramen, the cool resolve in Hinata's eyes, Sasuke's back as they stood together, equals at last. His entire life, a frantic, beautiful, chaotic scroll, unrolled in the space of a heartbeat. Then, the scroll burned. The light that consumed him was not warm gold, but a pure, sterile white. It didn't burn, it unmade. He felt his cells coming apart, his chakra network dissolving into motes of light, his very soul stretching thin. The last thing he felt was a profound sense of peace. He had done it. He had kept his promise. Everyone was safe. That was supposed to be the end. But there was a new beginning. It started not with a sight or a sound, but a feeling. The sensation of being gathered, like grains of sand, scattered across an infinite shore, being coaxed back into a single, cohesive form by a gentle, inexorable tide. There was no pain, just a deep, fundamental confusion. He remembered oblivion. He had accepted it. This was not oblivion. Awareness returned in a slow, syrupy wave. He was lying on something cool and unyieldingly smooth. It felt like polished obsidian, yet it held a warmth that seeped into his newly formed back. He opened his eyes. There was no sky. Above him, nebulas of incandescent purple and shimmering silver swirled in an endless, silent dance. Constellations he had never seen, made of stars that pulsed with living energy. Wheeled across a canvas of absolute black. He pushed himself up, his movements feeling strangely light, disconnected. He looked down at his hands. They were his hands, calloused from a lifetime of training. But they were translucent. A faint, golden light bled from the edges, and arcs of rainbow-colored energy, the lingering chaos of the tailed beast's chakra, flickered around his forearms like static electricity. He wasn't in a body. He was in a soul. The place was immense. A circular platform of that same star-flecked obsidian stretched for what felt like miles, floating in the heart of this impossible cosmos. In the distance, 5 impossibly tall structures, like torii gates made of solidified light, framed the platform. And in the center of it all, a throne sat empty. It wasn't ornate or grand, but carved from a single piece of what looked like crystalline bone, radiating a palpable sense of age and power. He was not alone. 5 figures stood before him. Their presence so immense it felt like the air, if there was air, had turned to lead. They weren't just standing there. They were a part of the landscape, as fundamental as the swirling nebulas above. The one in the center was a large, Bald monk with a thick black beard and prayer beads the size of fists draped around his neck. He wore simple black robes, but his eyes held the depth of a starless night sky. And Naruto felt as if those eyes could read every name he had ever known, every secret he had ever kept. To the monk's right stood a woman with an elaborate, almost geisha-like appearance. Her jet black hair was held up by enormous golden needles, and from behind her, 6 slender, skeletal arms, polished to a metallic sheen, hovered expectantly. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, weren't looking at him with awe or fear, but with a detached, analytical curiosity. She was sizing him up, measuring his worth. Next to her was a man with a wild, dark pompadour, leaning against an unseen force with a bored expression. He wore a white haori over his uniform and exuded an aura of such blistering, kinetic energy that Naruto could almost feel the heat from where he stood. He looked impatient, like a man who considered stillness a personal insult. On the monk's left was a lanky man with sunglasses and a wide, unsettling grin, his uniform adorned with flamboyant accessories. He bobbed his head to a silent rhythm, his hands shoved in his pockets. He seemed the most relaxed, but there was a razor's edge to his smile that suggested he was the most dangerous of them all. And beside him, a large, buxom woman with purple hair smiled warmly, a giant spoon-like object resting on her shoulder. Her warmth was genuine, but beneath it was a pressure like the bottom of the deepest ocean. Naruto scrambled to his feet, his new form buzzing with uncontrolled energy. Sage mode instinctively tried to activate, drawing in the nature energy of this place, but the energy here wasn't natural. It was raw, primordial, and the feedback sent a jolt through his soul that made him stagger. "Easy, there," the warm woman said, her voice like rich soil. "The air up here has a bit of a kick to it. You'll get used to it, or you'll dissolve." One of the two, the man with the pompadour snorted. "Took him long enough to wake up. For a candidate, he's a slow starter. I'm Tenjiro Kirinji. Try not to bleed on the floor, it's a pain to clean." The grinning man pushed his glasses up his nose. "Yo, the name's Etsu Namaya. Gotta say, your soul's got a real unique rhythm. Like 9 different drum solos all playing at once over a Zen flute. Wild." Quote. The monk in the center raised a hand, and the others fell silent instantly. His voice, when it came, was not loud, but it filled the infinite space, each word landing with the weight of a mountain. "Naruto Uzumaki. It wasn't a question. I am Ikebe Hyasube, and this," he gestured to the impossible realm around them, "is the Soul Palace. We are Squad Zero, the Royal Guard." Naruto's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and grief. Soul Palace, Royal Guard, none of it made sense. The war, Sasuke, Kagaya, that was real. This had to be a dream. An illusion. "Where am I?" he demanded, his voice raw. "What is this? Is this some kind of genjutsu? Let me go. I have to get back." He took a step forward, intending to charge through them if he had to, but the air solidified. The pressure from the 5 of them intensified 100-fold, not as an attack, but as a simple statement of fact. "You are not going anywhere." He was pinned, held in place by sheer spiritual will. The woman with the skeletal arms took a step forward, her gaze sweeping over him from head to toe. "His soul composition is unstable," she stated, her voice as sharp and precise as a needle. The lingering resonance from the 9 entities within him, combined with the so-called sage energy, it's a chaotic fusion. He's radiating Ryutsu like a broken furnace. She looked at Ikebe. "He will require containing vestments immediately. My name is Senjumaru Shutara." Naruto ignored her. He focused all his will on the monk, the clear leader. "I don't know who you people are, and I don't care. I died. I know I did. My friends. My world. I have to know they're okay. Send me back, or send me to wherever people are supposed to go." Ikebe's ancient eyes held a flicker of something that might have been pity. But it was buried under millennia of duty. "There is nowhere to send you back to," he said, his voice unchanging. "Your mortal life has concluded. And as for where you are supposed to go, you are already there." A tremor ran through the very fabric of the Soul Palace. It wasn't a physical shaking, but a deep, nauseating lurch in reality itself. The distant nebulas flickered, and for a split second, Naruto heard it. A faint, psychic scream, a chorus of a billion voices crying out in confusion and fear. He clutched his head. What was that? Tenjiro Kirinji pushed himself upright, his bored expression gone, replaced by a grim scowl. That, he said, is the problem. Aikibe's gaze shifted to the empty throne in the center of the platform. The realms are fraying at the seams. The balance that holds the world of the living, the Soul Society, and Hueco Mundo together has been compromised. The pivot, the linchpin, the axis upon which all of reality turns, has been removed. He paused, letting the words sink in. The Soul King is dead. The statement hung in the air, heavier than the spiritual pressure, more final than death itself. Naruto had no idea who or what the Soul King was, but he could feel the truth of the monk's words in the very marrow of his new spiritual bones. The lurching instability of this place was a symptom of a cosmic wound. He was assassinated, Senjumaru added, her tone clipped and factual, as if reporting on a broken weaving loom. A surprise attack, an enemy we did not anticipate. By the time we responded, the damage was done. Naruto stared at them, the pieces clicking into place with a dawning, horrifying clarity. Their titles, this place, the fact that he, a shinobi from a world they likely knew nothing about, was here. What does this have to do with me? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Aikibe finally met his gaze again, and the full weight of his attention felt like being judged by creation itself. A new king is needed. A new linchpin must be put in place before the worlds collapse into a single, screaming chaos. The king is not born, nor is he chosen by committee. He must simply be a soul of unique and overwhelming power, one capable of withstanding the pressure of three worlds and anchoring them through its own existence. He gestured a massive, calloused hand toward Naruto. We have scoured every plane of existence, every cycle of reincarnation, every soul in the river of life. And in all of creation, there is only one candidate, a human child who became a perfect sage, the Jinchuriki not of one-tailed beast, but of all nine. The reincarnation of a demigod, who gave his own life to seal away a god. Aikibe's voice became a low, resonant boom that vibrated in Naruto's very soul. Your existence is an anomaly, Naruto Uzumaki. A paradox of power, life, and will that should not be possible. And it is that paradox that makes you the only being in existence who can take the throne. Naruto felt the blood drain from his face, or the spiritual equivalent of it. He took a step back, shaking his head. No, you're insane. Me, a king. I'm a ninja. I was going to be Hokage. This is not my world. This isn't my fight. It is now. Tenjiro shot back. The worlds are connected. If the Soul Society falls, the world of the living will follow. The world you just died to protect will be torn apart. Its souls cast into the same chaos. Your sacrifice will have been for nothing. Every word was a physical blow. The thought of his world, of Konoha, of everyone he had fought and bled for, being annihilated because he refused this insane proposition, it was unthinkable. But the alternative, what would I have to do? He asked, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a cold, heavy dread. You would sit on that throne, Aikibe said, pointing toward the bone-white seat. And you would endure. You would become the nail that holds the universe together. You will feel the birth and death of every soul. You will bear the weight of their joys and their sorrows. You will exist outside of time, a silent, eternal warden. You will never again return to your home. You will never again see your friends. You will sacrifice everything you were for everything that is. It wasn't a choice. It was a sentence. An eternity of silent, lonely duty. It was the antithesis of everything he had ever been. He was noise, and chaos, and connection, and running headfirst into the fray. This was stillness, isolation, a cage made of creation itself. He looked past them, into the swirling cosmos, and thought of the faces of his friends. Sasuke, finally free of his hatred. Sakura, smiling through her tears. Kakashi, giving him a proud eye smile. He had bought them a future. If he said no, he would be the one to burn it all to ash. His shoulders slumped. The buzzing energy around him dimmed. He felt tired. Not just tired from a war, but cosmically, soul-deep tired. I don't have a choice, do I? He said, the words tasting like ash. Aikibe gave a slow, solemn nod. The greatest burdens are rarely chosen. Naruto's gaze fell upon Senjumaru. She was still watching him, her expression unreadable. Of all of them, her scrutiny felt the most personal, the most invasive. He felt like a specimen pinned to a board. You said, containing vestments. He asked, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. She nodded, her skeletal arms unfolding behind her like the petals of a deadly flower. Your power is raw, uncontrolled. It is a danger to yourself and this palace. Before you can approach the throne, you must be properly attired. I will weave you a shihakusha worthy of a king. Come with me. It was a command, not an invitation. She turned, her movements fluid and silent, and began to walk toward one of the massive floating structures. Naruto looked back at Ikebe, who simply inclined his head. With no other option, he followed her, the echoes of his lost life swirling around him like ghosts. The journey was silent. Naruto's mind was too numb for questions, and Senjumaru did not seem like the kind of person who welcomed idle chatter. They stepped onto a shimmering bridge of light that materialized before them, connecting the central platform to the towering edifice that was her domain. As they approached, he saw that it wasn't a building in the conventional sense. It was a colossal loom, its frame made of dark, polished wood and its strings woven from pure light. The entire structure hummed with a quiet, immense power. Inside, the space was even more bewildering. Threads of every color imaginable crisscrossed the air, weaving themselves into intricate patterns without any visible weaver. Her 6 skeletal arms moved independently of her body, plucking threads from the air, tying impossibly complex knots, and guiding shimmering fabrics through floating golden rings. The place was a symphony of silent, purposeful creation. It was beautiful, but it was also unnerving, a workshop for a spider goddess. Senjumaru stopped in the center of the room and turned to face him, her expression all business. Remove the remnants of your mortal attire. Naruto blinked. His orange and black jumpsuit was tattered and burned, barely holding together, but it was the last piece of his old life he had. What? I cannot take your measurements properly otherwise, she said, her tone devoid of any hint of embarrassment or flirtation. It was the same tone a blacksmith might use when telling a horse to stand still for a new shoe. Your soul form is still patterned on your physical self, but it is unstable. I must weave the Okain directly into the garment. It must fit perfectly to contain and regulate your spiritual pressure. Now, remove it. He hesitated for a moment, then sighed. It was ridiculous to feel self-conscious now. He let the tattered remains of his clothing dissolve into golden motes of light, leaving his soul form bare. It was strange. He felt no cold, no vulnerability, just the weird, tingling sensation of his own untamed power radiating from his skin. Senjumaru's eyes scanned him, but there was no judgment in her gaze. It was the look of a master craftsman assessing her materials. One of her skeletal arms, holding a measuring tape made of solidified moonlight, zipped through the air. It measured his height, the width of his shoulders, the length of his arms, all without ever touching him. Fascinating, she murmured, more to herself than to him. The integration of the foreign energies is seamless, yet volatile. It's like a perfectly built engine filled with nitroglycerin. They're my friends, Naruto said quietly. The words came out before he could stop them. Her eyes flicked up to meet his. The 9 beasts, you consider them friends. They are. They have names. Kurama, Shukaku, Matabi. He trailed off, realizing how insane this must sound. I see, she said, though her expression gave no clue as to whether she believed him or simply filed the information away. Their energy signatures are what make your soul so dense. It is why you are the only candidate. But it is also what will destroy you if left unchecked. She turned away from him and gestured to the air. Threads of the purest black and the most brilliant white flew towards her, gathering before her like iron filings to a magnet. Her true arms, hidden within her robes, emerged for the first time. They were slender and pale, and they moved with a grace that her skeletal appendages lacked. Her fingers danced through the threads, and a loom of shimmering gold light materialized before her. The garments of the royal guard are woven from the hair and bones of its members, she explained, her voice softening slightly as she began her work, lost in her craft. This is what grants us our Okain, our key, allowing us passage between the palace and the realms below. Your garment must be different. It must be woven not just with my essence, but with a matrix designed to channel and soothe the conflicting energies within you. It will be a cage and a bomb, all at once. Naruto watched, mesmerized, as the fabric began to take shape on the spectral loom. A standard black shihakusho, but the material seemed to drink the light, its blackness deeper than the void outside. A white haori formed alongside it, trimmed with a subtle, golden pattern that seemed to shift and move like flowing water. He finally broke the silence, the question that had been burning in his mind tumbling out. Did you even care that your king was dead? Her hands did not stop their work. The shuttle of light flew back and forth, the only sound in the vast chamber. For a long moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. The Soul King was not a person, she said at last, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. He was a function, a presence. His existence was a necessity for the stability of all things. His loss is a catastrophic logistical failure, not a personal tragedy. Grief is a luxury the Royal Guard cannot afford when reality itself is threatening to collapse. We do not mourn. We do our duty. We find a replacement and restore the function. Her words were cold, pragmatic, and utterly logical. And they made something in Naruto snap. The grief, the confusion, the sheer injustice of it all, boiled over. A function, a replacement. He shot back, his voice rising. Is that all anyone is to you people? A part in a machine. I had a life. I had people I loved. I had a dream. I died for them. And you dragged my soul up to this empty place to be a battery. To be a nail. Don't you talk to me about duty. My entire life was about duty. His power flared with his anger. The golden aura around him surged, and the rainbow sparks of Biju chakra crackled violently, causing the very threads in the air around them to vibrate. Senjumaru's hands finally stopped. She turned her head slowly, her sharp eyes fixing on him. The air grew heavy again, but this time, it was all her. The pressure was suffocating, a silent, powerful demand for him to control himself. Your life was about protecting a single village, a single continent, a single world, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. A noble, but limited, ambition. Our duty is to all worlds. To existence itself. You speak of your dream. Etsu Namaya dreamt of creating a sword that could cut anything. He succeeded, and his creation was deemed too dangerous for any one person to wield, so it was sealed and he was brought here. Tenjiro Kirinji dreamt of mastering every healing art known to man. He succeeded, creating waters that could restore life and spirit. And he was brought here. Kiryo Hakafuna, Ikebe Hayasube, myself. We all reached the pinnacle of our craft, our dreams so fully realized they began to warp the fabric of the world around us. So we were brought here, to serve a purpose greater than our individual ambitions. She took a step closer, the pressure intensifying. Every member of Squad Zero has a life they left behind. People they loved, dreams they sacrificed. Do not presume to lecture me on loss, Naruto Uzumaki. You have lost one world. We have been holding up all of them for millennia. Her words hit him harder than any physical blow. He saw not coldness in her eyes now, but a profound, ancient weariness. The same weariness he felt settling into his own soul. He had been a protector for a few short years. She had been doing this since before his nation was even founded. The angry energy around him subsided, retreating back under his skin. He looked away, ashamed. I'm sorry. Senjumaru watched him for a moment longer, then turned back to her loom. The pressure receded. Control your emotions, she advised, her tone back to its neutral, professional pitch. On the throne, a surge like that could shatter a continent. She worked in silence for a few more minutes, her hands a blur of motion. Finally, she plucked the finished garments from the golden loom. They floated in the air before her, radiating a quiet power. They are ready, she announced. She gestured, and the black kosode and hakama flew toward him, wrapping around his form as if they had a will of their own. The material was impossibly light, yet he could feel it instantly, a soothing, calming effect on the chaotic storm within him. The wild sparks of energy were drawn into the fabric, quieted. The white haori settled over his shoulders, its golden trim glowing faintly. On the back, an intricate golden spiral, reminiscent of his clan's symbol but far more complex, was woven into the fabric. It was a perfect fit. He felt contained, stable. It will take time for your soul to fully acclimate, she said. This will help. It is my finest work. Thank you, he said, the words feeling inadequate. She simply nodded. her 6 skeletal arms folding neatly behind her back. Ikebe will be waiting. It is time. They walked back across the bridge of light to the central platform. The other 4 members of Squad Z, RO were waiting exactly where they had left them. Ikebe's gaze fell upon Naruto, taking in the new garments, and he gave a slight, approving nod. You look the part, Tenjiro commented with a smirk. Now for the fun bit. Ikebe gestured toward the throne. The path is yours to walk, Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto looked at the empty throne, and his heart hammered in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to fight, to do anything but sit in that chair. But he saw the faces of his friends again. He saw Konoha, peaceful under the sun. This was the only way to keep it that way. It was the ultimate mission. With the highest possible stakes. It was his duty. He took a breath, then another. He walked forward, his new sandals silent on the obsidian floor. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the gravity of this place was increasing, pulling him toward his destiny. The throne loomed larger, its bony structure seeming to pulse with a silent, waiting power. He reached the base of the small dais upon which it sat. He looked back one last time at the 5 figures watching him. They were his guards, his wardens, his only companions in this gilded cage at the top of the universe. His eyes met Senjumaru's for a fleeting moment. Her expression was unreadable as ever, but he thought he saw a flicker of something new in their depths. Not pity, not respect, something else, understanding. He turned back to the throne. He reached out and placed a hand on its arm. The material was cool, like ancient bone, and a jolt of unimaginable energy shot up his arm. It wasn't chakra, it was something older, more fundamental. It was the hum of reality itself. With a final, weary sigh that carried the weight of a life given and a future lost, he sat down. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, everything happened. It was not a feeling of power, but of connection. A trillion ethereal threads, one for every soul in every realm, slammed into his consciousness. He felt a baby's first cry in a district of the Rukongai. He felt the hunger of a hollow tearing through the sands of Hawako Mundo. He felt a salaryman in Tokyo sighing as he boarded a crowded train. Joy, sorrow, rage, love, despair, hope, the raw, unfiltered emotions of trillions of beings flooded him, a psychic tsunami that threatened to tear his consciousness apart. He felt the slow, grinding turn of the cosmic balance, the delicate tension between life and death. Order and chaos. He was no longer Naruto Uzumaki, the ninja from Konoha. He was a nerve ending for all of creation. The pressure was absolute. The loneliness was infinite. He was the eye of a storm composed of every life that had ever been or ever would be. He was the king. He was the nail. He was the prisoner on the throne. And from across the platform, the 5 members of Squad Zero knelt. Their heads bowed to their new, eternal warden. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Court of Souls. Existence on the throne was not a series of moments, but a constant, unending state of being. There was no day or night, only the ceaseless, silent flow of souls through the great cosmic river. Naruto felt it all, a low, continuous hum at the base of his consciousness, the baseline of reality. It had been, he had no idea how long. Time had lost its meaning. It could have been a week or a century. He was the anchor, and the universe was the storm. He had learned to partition his mind. One part, the vast, silent majority, remained connected to the throne, performing the function he had been created for. It was the sage in him, the part that could sit still and feel the flow of nature. Now expanded to an impossible scale. But he kept a small, fiercely protected corner for himself. The part that was still Naruto Uzumaki. It was in that corner that he sorted through his memories, held on to the faces of his friends, and fought to remember the taste of ramen. So when Ikebe Hyasube appeared before the throne, his presence a sudden, sharp note in the universal hum, it was a welcome intrusion. It is time, the ancient monk said, his voice echoing in the silent expanse. The Seraite must formally acknowledge its king. Naruto opened his eyes. He felt the immense inertia of his position, the reluctance of the universe to let its anchor move. But the garments Senjumaru had woven for him did their work, acting as a buffer, allowing him to disconnect a fraction of his attention without causing a tremor in the realms. He stood, and the movement felt monumental. All right, Naruto said, his voice raspy from disuse. What do I have to do? Give a speech. Wave from a balcony. You must simply be seen, Ikebe replied. Your presence is your proclamation. The Gote 13 and the nobility must bear witness to the new foundation upon which their world rests. Senjumaru will accompany you. She is the most familiar with the currents of the court. She will be your guide. As if summoned by his name, she appeared, stepping silently from a shadow beside one of the great floating gates. She wore her usual intricate kimono, her 6 skeletal arms folded behind her, her expression as placid and unreadable as a polished stone. She gave him a slight, formal bow. Your Majesty. He winced at the title. Just Naruto is fine. That would be inappropriate, she replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. The journey down was not a walk. Ikebe led them to the edge of the central platform where Etsunamiya was waiting, leaning against a structure that looked like a giant, ornate elevator cage suspended from nothing. All aboard the Tenchiren, Etsu announced with a showman's flourish. The celestial pillar, my finest non-sword creation, guarantees a smooth ride from the royal realm to the Seraite in under 10 minutes. Side effects may include the mild existential dread and a sudden questioning of all you hold dear. Enjoy the ride. Naruto and Senjumaru stepped inside. The moment the gate closed, the obsidian floor beneath them became transparent. There was a lurch, not down, but inward, as if the universe were folding around them. Below, a tiny, shimmering disk of white expanded at an impossible speed. The Seraite. He's always like that, Senjumaru commented quietly, her gaze fixed on the approaching world below. His energy has to go somewhere. Better it be in terrible jokes than in accidentally cleaving a moon in half. You've all been up here a long time, haven't you? Naruto asked, watching the city of souls grow. He could now make out individual structures, the towering white edifice of the 1st Division's barracks at its center. Time is a different concept in the Soul Palace, she said. But yes, a very long time. The descent was unnervingly smooth and silent. The air inside the cage smelled of sterile ozone and old, powerful energy. He could feel the spiritual density of the world below rising to meet them, a thick, soupy atmosphere compared to the pure, thin essence of the Soul Palace. He was instinctively drawing in the energy, his sage senses cataloging it. It felt agitated. A hornet's nest stirred with a stick. The Tenchiren didn't land. It phased through the protective barrier around the Seraite, and came to a stop a dozen feet above the white gravel courtyard before the 1st Division headquarters. The door vanished, and a path of solidified light extended to the ground. The greeting party as the entirety of the Gote 13's leadership, captains and their lieutenants, arranged in 2 long, silent lines. Naruto recognized the sheer power arrayed before him. It was an army that could level nations, and their collective spiritual pressure was a physical weight in the air. Their faces were a mixture of stern duty, undisguised curiosity, and, from a few, poorly concealed suspicion. At the head of the formation stood a man in a garish pink, flower-patterned houri over his captain's uniform. He had a lazy, affable smile and was leaning on a cane, though Naruto sensed he needed it about as much as a fish needed a bicycle. 2 swords were tucked into his sash. Welcome to the Seraite, Your Majesty, the man said, his voice relaxed, almost casual. I am Shunsui Kyoraku, Captain Commander of the Gote 13. We are honored by your presence. He gave a slight bow, and the rest of the captains followed suit, a rustle of black cloth and a wave of bowing heads. Naruto walked down the ramp of light. Senjumaru a half-step behind him and to his right. He kept his expression neutral, his posture straight. He remembered Jiraiya's advice from years ago. When you're walking into a room full of powerful people who don't know you, act like you own the place. Not with arrogance, but with quiet confidence. His eyes scanned the captains. A tall, stoic man with intricate hairpieces and a scarf, made of impossibly fine silk, Byakuya Kuchiki. His spiritual pressure was cold and sharp, like a winter wind. A small, white-haired boy with eyes that looked 1,000 years old, Toshiro Hitsugaya. His energy felt like a dormant blizzard. A brutish, grinning giant with bells in his hair and an eye patch, his Ryutsu a chaotic, bloodthirsty wildfire, Kenpachi Zaraki. He wasn't looking at Naruto with reverence. He was looking at him like a starving man looks at a feast. The honor is mine, Captain Commander, Naruto replied, his voice calm and steady. "Thank you for the welcome." Of course, Shunsui said with an easy-going smile, though his eyes, shadowed by his hat, were sharp and analytical. The Central 46 and the heads of the great noble houses are assembled in the Great Hall. A formality, you understand. To officially register the transition. Lead the way, Naruto said. The walk through the seraite was a lesson in silent judgment. Shinigami of all ranks stopped what they were doing, their eyes following him. There were whispers, murmurs that his sage-enhanced hearing could pick up with perfect clarity. Is that him? He looks so young, a human. As the Soul King, it's an insult. Look at the woman with him. Shutara of the Royal Guard. It must be true. I heard he radiates the power of a dozen captains. Do you feel it? He felt Senjumaru shift slightly beside him. Pay them no mind, she said. Her voice a low murmur only he could hear. Dogs always bark at a new master. They will learn. Her cynicism was strangely comforting. She wasn't trying to manage his feelings or put on a show. She was simply stating a fact as she saw it. The Great Hall of the First Division was a cavernous, intimidating space. The ceiling was lost in shadow, and the walls were lined with the names of every Shinigami who had ever died in service. At the far end, on a raised dais, sat the assembled members of the Central 46, their faces hidden behind traditional screens, appearing as faceless, imposing silhouettes. Below them, in ornate seating, were the leaders of the nobility. The air was thick with the crushing weight of 100 centuries of tradition. Naruto and Senjumaru stopped in the center of the hall. The captains filed in behind them, taking their positions along the walls. The silence that fell was absolute and heavy. A voice, old and dry as dust, spoke Ram behind the central screen of the dais. You were presented as Naruto Uzumaki, a soul from the world of the living. I am, Naruto said, his voice carrying easily in the vast space. And you claim the title of Soul King. By the authority of the Royal Guard. I claim nothing, Naruto corrected, his tone firm. I was brought to the Soul Palace and given a duty. I accepted it to prevent the collapse of the realms. Your world included. Quote, a ripple of murmuring went through the nobles. The directness of his statement, his refusal to play the game of titles and claims, had clearly unsettled them. Another voice, smoother and laced with a condescending authority, spoke from the section of nobles. A man with sharp features, silver hair tied back in a severe topknot, and wearing robes of the deepest indigo silk, rose to his feet. His spiritual pressure was refined, ancient, but held a brittle, arrogant edge. Your Majesty, the man began, his bow a fraction too shallow to be truly respectful. I am Lord Kianeri of the House of Sazanami. We, the nobility of the Seraite, who have upheld the traditions of this world since its inception, are concerned. Concerned? Naruto asked, his gaze locking onto the man. Indeed, Kianeri continued, his voice resonating with practiced oratory. The Soul King has always been a presence. A concept. The unshakable foundation of our reality. Now, we are told that foundation is a man. A human. An outsider, with no understanding of our laws, our traditions, or our people. How can we be assured that this new arrangement is stable? How can the common souls of the Rukongai, or the noble houses, or even the Gote 13, place their faith in a king whose nature is a mystery to them? It was a masterful political attack, cloaked in the language of concern and piety. He wasn't calling Naruto an enemy, he was painting him as an unknown, a risk, a source of instability. My nature is not a mystery, Naruto replied, his voice cutting through the hall's tension. I am a protector. That is my nature, and it is all you need to know. A protector's words are one thing, Kianeri countered smoothly. Their strength is another. The people need a demonstration. A gesture of reassurance. A ceremonial display to show the Seraite the caliber of power that now safeguards them. A chance for us to understand the strength of our new king. Shunsui Kyoraku shifted, his lazy demeanor sharpening. Lord Kianeri, that is highly unorthodox. The king's authority is absolute, not subject to public approval. It is not about approval, Captain Commander, Kianeri said, turning his condescending smile on Shunsui. It is about faith, and faith must be earned. I am merely suggesting a way for him to earn it swiftly. Naruto saw the trap. If he refused, he would look weak, afraid. If he accepted, he would be legitimizing their right to test him. They would be setting the terms of his rule. He had to flip the board over. A demonstration, Naruto said, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across his face. The same grin he'd worn before facing down a tailed beast. I think that's a fine idea. But if we're going to do it, let's not make it a ceremony. Let's make it a real fight. The hall erupted in shocked whispers. Kianeri's smug expression faltered for the first time. This was not the response he had anticipated. A fight, Your Majesty. He stammered. That's right, Naruto said, his voice booming with newfound energy. He was back in his element now. This wasn't politics. This was a challenge. You want to see my power? Fine, I'll show you. I need a volunteer. Who wants to be the one to test the Soul King? His gaze swept over the captains. Most looked stunned, some intrigued. Byakuya Kuchiki's expression was unreadable. Hitsugaya looked concerned, but one of them was vibrating. A low, guttural chuckle echoed through the hall, a sound like rocks grinding together. Kenpachi Zaraki stepped forward, his wild grin splitting his face. The tiny bells in his hair jingled with his barely contained excitement. Me, he growled, the word a promise of violence. I'll do it. I want to fight him. The atmosphere in the hall changed from tense to electric. If Kianeri's proposal was a political knife, Kenpachi's acceptance was a cannon. Captain Zaraki, a stern-looking captain with a helmet covering half his face, barked. Show some respect. This is not a brawl. Quote. Kenpachi ignored him, his one good eye fixed on Naruto, blazing with manic glee. He asked for a volunteer, didn't he? He said he wanted a real fight. Or was that just talk? No, Naruto said, his own grin widening to match the captain's. He could feel the raw, untamed power rolling off Kenpachi in waves. It was exhilarating. It wasn't just talk. He turned his gaze back to Lord Kianeri, whose face had gone pale. Well, my lord, you wanted a demonstration to reassure the people. I can't think of anything more reassuring than a decisive victory over the strongest captain in the Gote 13. Or do you disagree? Kianeri was cornered. To back down now would be to admit his proposal was a sham, a political ploy. To agree would be to unleash Kenpachi Zaraki on their new king. A prospect that terrified everyone in the room except for the two combatants. Of course, Kianeri managed to say, his voice tight. The test will be enlightening. Excellent, Naruto declared, clapping his hands together. When and where? Sokyoku Hill, Kenpachi grunted. Tomorrow. Dawn. Don't be late. With that, the captain of the 11th Division turned and stalked out of the hall. His massive spiritual pressure leaving a wake of nervous energy behind him. The audience was over. The point had been made, though not the one Kianeri intended. Naruto had end their test and turned it into his own proclamation of strength. As the assembled nobles and captains began to disperse, still buzzing with the shock of what had just transpired, Senjumaru moved to Naruto's side. That was impulsive, she said, though there was no censure in her tone. It was necessary, Naruto countered. They wanted to put me in a box. I had to show them I don't fit. You did more than that, Shunsui Kyoraku said, approaching them with a wry sigh. You just agreed to a deathmatch with a man who considers a severed limb a sign of a good warm-up. Lord Kianeri may be a snake, but you just volunteered to wrestle a shark. I've wrestled bigger, Naruto said simply. Shunsui studied him for a long moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. You know, I think this is going to be far more interesting than I thought. If you'll excuse me, I have a mountain of paperwork to file explaining why the Seraite's new god king is about to try and murder one of my captains. He tipped his hat and sauntered off. As the hall emptied, leaving only them and a few lingering attendants, Senjumaru turned to him. Kianeri will not forgive this. You have publicly humiliated him and seized the narrative. He will see it as a declaration of war. He's the one who threw the first punch, Naruto said. I just threw a harder one back. He looked around the now empty hall. So, that's the court. A bunch of stuck-up nobles and fighters. A simplistic, but not entirely inaccurate, assessment, she replied. Come, there is much you have not seen. And it is better you see it with a guide than stumble upon it yourself. Quote, She led him out of the 1st Division barracks and into the sprawling, labyrinthine streets of the Seraite. It was a city of stark white and black, clean, orderly, and ancient. She moved with a silent, purposeful grace, and he followed, the two of them a strange sight, the new god king and his ancient, enigmatic guardian. Kianeri's family, the Sazanami clan, is one of the lesser noble houses. She explained as they walked, her voice low. They have prestige, but little true power compared to the great noble houses like the Kuchiki or Shihoin. His ambition far outstrips his station. He sees your arrival as an opportunity. A power vacuum. By positioning himself as the voice of tradition and the loyal opposition, he hopes to consolidate the Supo RT of other conservative nobles and become a kingmaker, or, in this case, a king breaker. So he's just a politician, Naruto grunted. I've dealt with his type before. They talk a big game, but fold when things get real. Do not underestimate him, she cautioned. He is not a warrior, but his words are weapons. He can poison minds far more effectively than any blade. He has already planted the seeds of doubt throughout the Seraite. Your fight with Zaraki is no longer just a fight. It is a political statement. If you win, you solidify your authority. If you lose, I'm not going to lose, he said. The conviction in his voice absolute. She glanced at him, her sharp eyes appraising. Kenpachi Zaraki is not like any opponent you have ever faced. He does not use tricks or strategy. He is a monument of pure, unadulterated spiritual power and the will to cut. He lives for nothing but the thrill of a battle that pushes him to the edge of death. To him, this is not a test. It is a gift. Good, Naruto said with a grin. I always liked a straightforward fight. Their walk took them through different districts. He saw the sprawling barracks of the various divisions, each with its own distinct character. The 11th Division's area was loud, chaotic, and smelled of sweat and sake. The 4th Division's was quiet, serene, filled with the scent of medicinal herbs. The 12th Division's headquarters hummed with a bizarre, almost frantic energy, strange noises and occasional small explosions echoing from within. Is there a place here that feels less like an army barracks? He asked. Senjumaru considered this for a moment. I maintain a small, private workshop here in the Seraite. For when my duties require my presence for extended periods. It is quiet. She led him down a series of smaller, unmarked alleyways. A route no one would casually find. They stopped before a simple, unassuming wooden door. She placed a slender hand on it, and the wood seemed to ripple, the grain shifting. To form an intricate locking pattern before dissolving, allowing the door to swing open. The inside was a stark contrast to the austere world outside. It was a miniature version of her workshop in the Soul Palace. Bolts of impossible fabrics were stacked to the ceiling, cloth that shimmered like captured moonlight, silk that was the color of a sunset over a world he'd never seen, dark velvet that seemed to swallow the light. A single, elegant loom of dark wood and silver thread stood in the center of the room, a half-finished project glowing softly upon it. The air smelled of hot metal, ozone, and strange, alien silks. It was a place of creation, an artist's sanctuary. This is amazing, Naruto said, genuinely impressed. He ran a hand over a bolt of cloth that felt like cool water. It is merely a workspace, she said. Though he detected a faint note of pride in her voice. She moved to a low table and began to prepare tea with practiced, elegant motions. The materials here are lesser than those in the royal realm. But they suffice. He watched her, the way her hands moved with such precision and grace. They were the same hands that had woven the very clothes he wore, the garment that kept his chaotic power from tearing him apart. Why are you helping me? He asked, the question blunt. You could have just stood back and watched the nobles tear me apart. She paused in pouring the hot water, the steam rising to curl around her face. My duty is to the Soul King. Not to the man, but to the office. The stability of the realms depends on the king's authority being unchallenged. Lord Kianeri's political machinations are a threat to that stability. Therefore, he is a threat I must help you neutralize. My motives are practical, not personal. Right, practical, Naruto said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. He sat down on a cushion opposite her. Back in my world, I was an outcast. A pariah. Everyone looked at me with fear or hatred because of the fox demon sealed inside me. I spent my whole life fighting for acknowledgement, just trying to get people to see me for who I was. Senjumaru placed a cup of tea before him. It was a pale green, and the aroma was unlike anything he had ever smelled. Both floral and sharp. And now you are a king, and people look at you with fear and suspicion for a different reason. It seems your struggles have merely changed scale. Yeah, I guess so, he admitted, taking a sip of the tea. It was incredible, warming him from the inside out. You said you all gave up your old lives, your dreams. What was yours? She looked at her loom, her expression softening for the first time, a flicker of ancient memory in her eyes. I wanted to create something truly perfect. A garment that could not be stained, or torn, or unraveled. A piece of weaving that would be an ultimate expression of the craft. I pursued that dream for centuries. I came close. What happened? I succeeded, she said simply. I wove a shuho, a phoenix robe. That was conceptually indestructible, but in doing so, I had learned to manipulate the very threads of causality and matter. Such an invention was deemed too dangerous for the lower realms. So, I and my creation were elevated. I was given a new duty, to weave the defenses of the king. To create, not for beauty, but for function. There it was again, that word, function. But this time, hearing her story, it sounded different. Not cold, but resigned. A sacrifice. So you're a prisoner, too, he said quietly. Her eyes snapped back to his, sharp and piercing. I am the Great Weaver Guard. A member of the Royal Guard. I am one of the 5 pillars that hold up the heavens. I am not a prisoner. I am a warden in a bigger cage, he countered gently. They sat in silence for a moment, the unspoken truth of his words hanging between them. They were both trapped by their own power, bound by a duty they had not chosen. In that shared understanding, a connection formed, something deeper than a king and his guard. It was the quiet camaraderie of 2 beings living in gilded cages. The serene moment was shattered. The door to the workshop flew open with a bang, revealing a frantic, sea-looking Shinigami from the 12th Division, his uniform askew and his face pale with panic. Lady Shutara, Captain Commander Kiraku sent me an urgent message from the Hawako Mundo Monitoring Division. Senjumaru was on her feet instantly, her gentle demeanor vanishing, replaced by the sharp authority of a royal guard. Report. The man was breathing heavily, clutching a data scroll. R. Long Ran, GE Patrol, Squad 37. They were investigating a dimensional distortion on the outer rim of the desert. We lost contact 3 hours ago. And, Senjumaru pressed, her voice sharp. We just received a final transmission. A single, heavily corrupted data packet. It took the Institute an hour to decode it. It wasn't a report. It was a message. Just 5 words. The Shinigami looked from Senjumaru to Naruto, his eyes wide with a terror that went beyond a simple combat report. He swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he relayed the final words of the doomed patrol. The God of Stars is hungry. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Weaver and the Whirlwind. Dawn was a fragile thing over the Seraite. It bled across the sky in hues of soft rose and pale gold, chasing away the deep, star-dusted purple of the Soul Society's night. On the peak of Sokyoku Hill, the air was thin and sharp, carrying the scent of clean stone and the faint, ozone tang of immense spiritual power. The very ground here was saturated with it, having borne witness to countless executions and pivotal moments in the history of this world. Today, it would bear witness to another. Naruto sat cross-legged in the center of the wide, flat execution grounds. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow and even. He wasn't nervous. The feeling humming under his skin wasn't anxiety, but a familiar, thrumming anticipation he hadn't felt since the war. The frantic energy of the throne room, the cloying politics of the court, that was the alien world. This, a one-on-one fight against an opponent of monstrous strength. This was home. He had extended his senses, allowing sage mode to naturally bloom within his soul. He could feel the life of the Seraite below him, a sprawling network of sleeping and waking souls. He could feel the cold, sharp focus of the captains beginning to stir in their barracks. And he could feel a single, blazing inferno of bloodlust and excitement moving steadily toward the hill, a comet of raw power that was Kenpachi Zaraki. But beneath it all, a dissonant hum persisted in the back of his mind. The 5 words from the doomed patrol squad. The God of Stars is hungry. It was a cold spot in the warmth of the rising sun. A reminder that this duel, as important as it was for the politics of this strange new world, was a prelude. The real storm had yet to make landfall. He pushed the thought aside. One battle at a time. That was how he'd always lived. A whisper of movement, silent as falling silk, announced her arrival. He didn't need to open his eyes to know it was her. Senjumaru's spiritual C.G. nature was as unique and complex as her weaving, 1,000 threads of immense power, all perfectly controlled, giving off an aura of serene, lethal precision. He opened his eyes. She stood a few feet away, the morning light catching the golden needles in her hair. In her primary hands, she held a folded garment. It was a white haori, similar to the one he already wore, but subtly different. The fabric seemed to have a faint, almost imperceptible pattern woven into it, like ripples on still water, and the black lining was as deep as the space between stars. A king should not enter into a formal contest of arms in his daily attire, she said, her voice as calm and crisp as the morning air. It is a matter of decorum. I figured Zaraki wouldn't care much for decorum, Naruto replied, rising to his feet and stretching. His joints popping. He does not, she conceded. But the 100 nobles and 1,000 officers who will be watching from below do. This is theater as much as it is combat. You must look the part. She held the haori out to him. This one is better suited for the occasion. He took it from her. The material was impossibly light, yet felt more durable than steel. As he slipped it on over his shihakusho, he felt an immediate difference. The first haori was a container, a bomb that soothed and regulated his chaotic inner energies. This one was a conductor. It felt alive, humming in tune with his own spiritual pressure, amplifying his connection to the natural energy around him. What did you do to this one? He asked, impressed, rolling his shoulders to settle the garment. The threads are woven from a different source, she explained, her gaze fixed on the fit, the analytical eye of the artisan taking over. They are spun from the petrified branches of the sun tree. A plant in my garden that only grows in the direct light of the royal palace. The threads have a unique property. They absorb and redirect kinetic energy. Not enough to stop a direct blow from a blade like Zaraki's, of course. That would be impossible, but it will diffuse a fraction of the impact from unfocused strikes or the shockwaves of his Ryutsu. It might grant you a microsecond. In a fight of this speed, a microsecond can be the difference between a victory and a vivisection. He looked at her, truly looked at her. Her expression was neutral, her explanation purely technical. But the action itself, this was not the act of a simple warden fulfilling a practical duty. This was a gift, a gesture of something. Support, alliance. You went to a lot of trouble, he said quietly. As I said, she replied, her eyes not quite meeting his. The stability of the realms depends on your authority. Your defeat would be a logistical inconvenience. I am merely taking steps to prevent it. He grinned. Right, logistical inconvenience. Got it. He could play her game. He knew what it was like to hide behind a mask, to use words to keep the world at arm's length. Thanks, Senjumaru, for the logistical support. For the first time since they had met, the corner of her mouth twitched, a barely perceptible flicker of a smile that was gone as soon as it appeared. See that it is not wasted. The ground trembled. The single, blazing inferno of power had arrived at the base of the hill. It was followed by a cacophony, the roar of hundreds of the 11th Division's most boisterous members. Their combined battle cries a wave of raw, anarchic energy. It seems your opponent is here, Senjumaru stated, turning to leave the execution grounds. I will take my place with the other observers. Try not to destroy the hill. It has historical significance. No promises, he called after her. She paused at the edge of the plateau. One last piece of advice, Naruto Uzumaki. She looked back over her shoulder, her sharp eyes fixing on him. He will not fight to subdue you. He will not fight to test you. He will fight to kill you. It is the only way he knows how to show respect. Do him the courtesy of responding in kind. Quote. With that, she was gone, a silent flicker of movement down the path. Naruto stood alone in the center of the arena, the weight of her final words settling on him. Respond in kind. He had spent years learning to control himself, to hold back, to subdue rather than destroy. She was telling him to let go. The roar of the 11th Division grew louder as they surrounded the base of the hill, a rowdy, bloodthirsty audience. Then, the captains began to appear, using shunpo to arrive silently at the designated observation points ringing the plateau. Shunsui Kyoraku, Toshiro Hitsugaya, Byakuya Kuchiki, all of them, their expressions ranging from grim to curious. Lord Kianari was there too, standing amongst a contingent of nobles, his face a mask of smug anticipation. He fully expected to see his problem solved for him this morning. Finally, a single figure crested the hill. Kenpachi Zaraki was an intimidating sight. He was a mountain of muscle and scars, his captain's howry ragged at the edges. Worn more out of necessity than pride. His smile was a predator's, and his one visible eye burned with an intensity that could curdle milk. Slung over his shoulder was his Zanpakuto, Nozarashi. Its blade chipped and worn, looking more like a salvaged slab of iron than a noble weapon. But Naruto could feel the soul within that blade. It was a sleeping beast, ancient and savage. Perfectly matched to its wielder. "So you showed up," Kenpachi grunted, his voice a low rumble. "Good. I was getting bored. Wouldn't miss it for the world," Naruto replied, his own grin spreading. Kenpachi took a step forward, and the spiritual pressure in the air skyrocketed. It wasn't a controlled release like the other captains, it was a physical force, a crushing, suffocating wave of yellow energy that cracked the stones at his feet. The air grew thick, heavy, tasting of blood and ozone. For most opponents, this alone would be enough to induce paralysis and terror. Naruto stood his ground, unmoving. His own golden aura, a mixture of sage energy and Kurama's residual power, flared to life, meeting the wave of pressure and neutralizing it. The air around him remained calm, an eye in Kenpachi's hurricane. Kenpachi's grin widened, showing more teeth. "Ha, you can take it. Good. This might actually be fun." He didn't announce the start of the fight. There was no ceremony. One moment he was standing 30 yards away, the next he was on top of Naruto, his massive blade swinging down in a raw, brutal arc meant to cleave him in two. The sheer force of the swing shrieked through the air. Naruto didn't try to block. He didn't even draw a weapon. He simply moved. His body, enhanced by Sage Mode and his own prodigious speed, flowed backward, the edge of the Zanpakuto. Yuto missing his nose by less than an inch. The wind from the blow alone whipped his hair and Haori back. Kenpachi's blade slammed into the ground where Naruto had been standing, and the entire hilltop shook. A spiderweb of cracks erupted from the point of impact, and pulverized stone sprayed into the air. "Fast," Kenpachi noted with approval, already pulling his enormous blade from the shattered ground for another swing. The fight became a blur of motion. Kenpachi was all offense, a whirlwind of relentless, powerful strikes. His movements were not elegant or refined, they were brutally efficient. Each swing carrying enough force to level a building. He fought with pure instinct, his body moving with a predatory grace that belied his size. Naruto was his opposite. He was a leaf in the wind, a river flowing around a boulder. He flowed, he dodged, he weaved. His Sage Mode was a perfect counter to Kenpachi's chaotic style. He didn't need to see the attacks coming, he could feel them. He felt the spike of killing intent. The shift of muscle, the surge of spiritual pressure a split second before each strike was launched. He moved not to where the blade was, but to where it was going to be, and made sure he wasn't there. "Stand still and fight, damn you!" Kenpachi roared, frustrated, his swings growing wider, more destructive. He wasn't just swinging at Naruto anymore, he was swinging at the space around him. Trying to obliterate the very ground he stood on. Below, the audience was stunned into silence. Lord Kianari's smug expression had been replaced by one of disbelief. He had expected to see the human king overwhelmed and butchered in seconds. Instead, he was watching a masterful display of evasion that made the most feared captain in the Gote 13 look like a clumsy giant swatting at a fly. "His speed, it's unreal," Toshiro Hitsugaya murmured, his eyes wide. "No," Byakuya Kuchiki corrected, his voice a low monotone, though his knuckles were white where he gripped his sword hilt. "It is not just speed. It is perception. He is anticipating Captain Zaraki's every move." Senjumaru watched from her vantage point, her face impassive. But her skeletal arms, hidden behind her, were unconsciously tapping out a fast, complex rhythm against her back. Naruto knew he couldn't dodge forever. He was learning Kenpachi's rhythm, the tells in his movements, the slight pauses between his rampages. Now, it was time to push back. As Kenpachi lunged forward in a powerful thrust, Naruto didn't dodge. He dropped, his hand slapping the ground. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. With a puff of smoke, 2 identical copies of Naruto appeared on either side of Kenpachi. The captain's eyes widened in momentary confusion, his thrust continuing harmlessly through the space where the original had been. "What trick is this?" he bellowed. The clones didn't answer. They attacked. One went high, the other low. They weren't trying to land a decisive blow. Their attacks were feints, designed to distract and disorient. Kenpachi laughed, a booming, joyous sound. "More of you just means more to cut." He spun, his blade a blur, and cleaved one of the clones in half. It vanished in a puff of smoke. He brought the blade back around and impaled the second, which also dissipated. But the tactic had worked. For the 2 seconds Kenpachi had been occupied with the clones, the real Naruto had created an opening. Rasengan. Naruto burst from behind Kenpachi, a swirling sphere of pure, concentrated chakra roaring in his palm. He slammed it into the captain's broad back. The impact was immense. The Rasengan, an attack designed to grind and tear its target apart from the inside, met the solid wall of Kenpachi's spiritual pressure. The resulting explosion threw Kenpachi forward, gouging a long trench in the stone as he slid to a halt. His captain's haori was shredded in the back, but the skin underneath, though bruised and smoking, was unbroken. Kenpachi slowly stood up, rolling his massive shoulders. He turned, a trickle of blood leaking from the corner of his mouth. His grin was wider, more manic than ever. "Yes, that's it," he roared, his voice filled with ecstatic pleasure. "That's the stuff. A real punch. My turn." He gripped his sword with both hands, a gesture he rarely made. The air pressure on the hill dropped, then exploded outward. His spiritual power, the suffocating yellow aura, intensified, solidifying. Becoming a visible, shimmering skull around him. This was Kenpachi getting serious. "This is bad," Shunsui said quietly from the observation point. "He's taking off the limiters." Naruto felt the change immediately. The raw power coming off Kenpachi had at least doubled. The playful, chaotic energy was gone, replaced by a pure, focused killing intent that felt sharp enough to cut the air. Kenpachi charged. He was no longer just fast. He was a blur, closing the distance between them in a single, ground-shattering step. The swing that followed was not a wild cleave, but a precise, controlled kendo strike, all of his monstrous power focused into a single, perfect line. Naruto's eyes widened. There was no dodging this. The sheer speed and pressure locked him in place. He had to meet it head-on. His mind worked in a flash. He channeled Kurama's chakra, the familiar, powerful red energy enveloping his golden sage mode aura. It flowed down his right arm, coalescing in his palm. He didn't just form a Rasengan. He infused it, fed it, swelled it with the potent, destructive power of a tailed beast. The sphere grew, turning a violent violet black, the sound. It made shifting from a roar to a high-pitched, world-ending shriek. Odama Biju Rasengan. He met Kenpachi's two-handed strike with his one-handed sphere of destruction. Blade met chakra. The world vanished in a silent flash of white light. The sound came a moment later. Not an explosion, but a deafening, continuous crack, as if the sky itself were being torn in half. A dome of raw energy erupted from the point of impact. Half brilliant yellow, half malevolent violet. The entire Sokyoku Hill screamed under the strain, the stone cracking and melting. The shockwave that followed was a physical wall of force that slammed into the observation points, forcing the captains and nobles to brace themselves with their own ryutsu. Lord Kianari was thrown from his feet, his face a mask of pure terror. Inside the dome of power, the two combatants were locked in a stalemate. Kenpachi's veins stood out on his arms and forehead, every muscle strained as he pushed his blade into the churning vortex of the Biju Rasengan. Naruto's feet had been driven into the solid rock up to his ankles, his arm trembling with the effort of holding back the force of a man who could cut mountains. "You are strong," Kenpachi grunted, a bloody smile plastered on his face. "So are you," Naruto yelled back over the din, his own grin just as fierce. But Naruto could feel it. Kenpachi's power was immense, but it was finite. His own energy, drawn from the tailed beasts and the very nature of the world, was vaster. He was winning the exchange, but only just. He needed to end it. With a final, defiant roar, Naruto poured every last drop of accessible power into the Rasengan. The sphere swelled, its rotational force overwhelming the physical steel of Kenpachi's blade. Cracks appeared on the Zanpakuto's surface. With a sound like a dying star, the energy dome collapsed inward, then exploded outward and upward in a colossal pillar of light that shot into the heavens, visible from every corner of the Seraite. When the light faded, the hilltop was a wasteland. A massive crater smoked in the center of the plateau. On one side stood Naruto, his arm smoking, his new haori singed at the edges but miraculo. Usly intact thanks to Senjumaru's weaving. On the other side, Kenpachi was on one knee, breathing in ragged, heaving gasps. His Zanpakuto was still in his hands, but it was fractured, a deep crack run ning almost the entire length of the blade. His body was covered in deep lacerations from the backlash of the Rasengan's energy. But he was still smiling. Incredible, he wheezed, his one eye blazing with a feverish light. Just incredible. He tried to stand, to raise his sword for another round, but his body had reached its limit. He collapsed onto his side, unconscious, the manic grin still frozen on his face. Silence. The entire Seraite was shrouded in a blanket of stunned silence. The fight was over. Naruto stood in the center of the devastation, his chest heaving. He had won. He had met the monster head-on and had proven to be the bigger monster. He looked down at his trembling hand. He hadn't felt a thrill like that in a long, long time. Then, a roar erupted from the base of the hill. It wasn't a cry of anger or defeat. It was a cheer. The members of the 11th Division, Kenpachi's loyal, battle-crazed followers, were roaring their approval. They had witnessed the greatest fight of their lives. And their captain had been given the gift of a worthy opponent. Their respect for Naruto was instantaneous, absolute, and born of violence. Naruto looked toward the observation points. The faces of the captains were a mixture of shock, awe, and deep, profound recalculation. They had just seen their most powerful brawler defeated in a direct contest of strength. This new king was not a figurehead. He was a force of nature. His eyes found Lord Kianari. The nobleman's face was ashen, his smug confidence shattered. He looked at Naruto not with simple hatred anymore, but with genuine fear. Naruto had not just defeated a captain, he had annihilated Kianari's entire political strategy. Finally, his gaze met Senjumaru's. Her face, as always, was a perfect, impassive mask. But he could see it in her eyes. A gleam of something that went beyond approval. It was a spark of fierce, unadulterated pride. She had backed the right horse, and he had just won the race in spectacular fashion. Shunsui Kyoraku was the first to move, appearing beside Kenpachi's fallen form in a flicker of shunpo. He checked the captain's pulse, then sighed in relief. Leave it to Zaraki to look half dead and be happier than a kid in a candy store. He looked up at Naruto, his easygoing smile gone, replaced by a look of deep respect. An impressive display, Your Majesty. Truly. The other captains began to descend, their shock giving way to their duties. Azane Katetsu, the lieutenant of the 4th Division, and her medical team were already rushing up the hill to attend to Kenpachi. Naruto felt the adrenaline begin to fade, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. He had expended a tremendous amount of energy. He took a steadying breath, the golden sage aura receding, leaving him feeling drained but clear-headed. He had done what he'd set out to do. He had shown them his power. He had shown them through action, not words, that he was worthy of the throne. But as he looked out from the ruined hilltop, over the silent, awestruck city of souls, the cold spot in his mind returned. The 5 words echoed in the sudden quiet. The god of stars is hungry. He had won the battle for the Seraite's respect. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that the war for existence itself was just beginning. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Echoes of the Void. The 4th Division barracks smell. Lead of antiseptic herbs and healing keto. It was a place of quiet, measured calm, a stark contrast to the raw, chaotic energy that had torn apart Sokyoku Hill just hours before. In a private recovery room, Kenpachi Zaraki was awake. He was sitting upright in bed, his torso a patchwork of bandages applied with the practiced, exasperated skill of Captain Unohana's medical staff. He was not grimacing in pain or sullen in defeat. He was laughing. It was a low, rumbling chuckle, a sound of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. To be pushed that far, to feel my blade start to crack, he ran a thumb over the fractured steel of Nozarashi, which lay propped against his bedside. It's been centuries, centuries. Standing by the window, looking out over the now peaceful Seraite, Shunsui Kyoraku sighed, tipping his hat down. You're the only man I know who would consider having his internal organs nearly liquefied a good day at the office, Kenpachi. It was the best day, Kenpachi corrected, his wild grin returning. That kid, the king, he's the real deal. Tell Kianari and his stuffed shirt cronies that. Tell them the strongest man in the Seraite says so. I don't think I'll have to, a new voice said from the doorway. Naruto stood there, his singed haori swapped for the original one Senjumaru had made him. He looked tired, the adrenaline of the fight having long since faded, but his eyes were clear and steady. He gave Kenpachi a nod. You're looking better. Kenpachi's grin widened. You too. For a guy who took a direct hit from me, you're not even limping. What was that ball of swirly stuff? It packed a hell of a punch. It's called a Rasengan, Naruto said, walking further into the room. And you blocked it with your face. I'm the one who should be impressed. The respect between them was palpable, a simple, straightforward acknowledgement of each other's strength that transcended politics and titles. It was a language both of them understood perfectly. The reports from the other divisions are already coming in, Shunsui interjected, his tone turning more serious. He pushed himself away from the window to face Naruto. Your fight had an effect. The lower-ranking officers are buzzing. They saw the pillar of light, felt the tremor. They know something monumental happened. And the members of the 11th Division are treating you like a conquering hero. They respect strength above all else. And you gave them a masterclass. And the nobles? Naruto asked. Kianari has gone to ground, Shunsui said with a wry smile. He and his faction are silent for the first time in decades. You didn't just defeat Kenpachi, you shattered their narrative. They painted you as a weak, illegitimate outsider. Now, everyone in the Seraite knows you can go toe-to-toe with Zaraki and walk away. Their platform of concern for the Seraite's security looks ridiculous. You've won the respect of the Gote 13, and you've terrified the opposition into silence. As far as political debuts go, it was a home run. Naruto nodded, but he felt no real satisfaction. It was a fight. It's over. Now we have bigger problems. He looked at Shunsui, his expression grim. That message from Hueco Mundo. The god of stars is hungry. What do we know? Before Shunsui could answer, the door slid open again with a sharp, metallic hiss. Captain Mayuri Kuratsuchi of the 12th Division stood there. His face painted in its usual black and white, his expression one of intense, almost gleeful, scientific curiosity. Ah, excellent. All the relevant primates are gathered in one location, Mayuri said. His voice dripping with condescension. He held a data pad that flickered with complex charts. Regarding the fascinating anomaly in Hueco Mundo, my institute has finished its preliminary analysis of the residual energy signatures from the patrol squad's last known position. And, Naruto pressed, impatient with the captain's theatrics. And it is unlike anything in our data banks, Mayuri continued, his golden eyes gleaming. It is not the Ryutsu of a hollow, an Arankar, or a Shinigami. It possesses a spiritual density that is, frankly, offensive. More importantly, we've analyzed the atmospheric composition. The patrol was not wiped out in a battle. Their souls, and the souls of every hollow within a 10-mile radius, were deconstructed. Unwritten from the roll of existence. It is not an exaggeration to say that a patch of Hueco Mundo is now a complete void. There is nothing there. The cycle of souls has been broken in that location. The room went cold. This was a violation of the fundamental laws of their universe. Souls were meant to be purified, to be reincarnated, to flow. Not to be erased. They're harvesting, Naruto said, the word tasting like poison. They're not conquering. They're eating. A crude but accurate summation, Mayuri confirmed. This god of stars is not a predator in the conventional sense. It is a cosmic parasite. And its feeding habits are causing a catastrophic imbalance. The sudden eradication of so many souls at once is creating a vacuum. If it continues, the barrier between Hueco Mundo and the world of the living will begin to degrade. The consequences would be, well, apocalyptic is such an overused term, but it would be undeniably spectacular from a scientific perspective. Just then, a piercing alarm began to shriek through the Seraite. A frantic voice echoed from the division's communication system. Emergency broadcast. Multiple Garganta openings detected across the entire eastern sector of Hueco Mundo. Energy signatures match the anomaly. It's a full-scale invasion. Shunsui was already moving, his lazy demeanor gone, replaced by the sharp focus of the captain commander. Mayuri, get me a live feed. Kenpachi, stay put. The rest of the captains, assemble at the 1st Division gates. Now, Naruto was right beside him. I'm going. Your Majesty, that's not. Don't. Naruto cut him off, his voice iron. Don't tell me my place is on the throne. I didn't take this job to sit on a chair and watch one of my realms burn. My nature is to be a protector, remember. I protect from the front. Shunsui looked at him, at the absolute conviction in his eyes. And a slow smile spread across his face. I was going to say, that's not a request I can deny. Your orders, Your Majesty. The shift was subtle but immense. Nsui wasn't just humoring him or respecting his power. He was acknowledging him as his commander. Get me Squad 0, Naruto ordered. And any captains who can be deployed immediately. We're going to Hueco Mundo, and we're ending this now. Quote, the journey to Hueco Mundo was a violent tear in the fabric of reality. They didn't use the slow, stately Tenchirin. Ikebe Hyasube himself opened the way, inting a character for passage, in the air with a brush as large as a man. The ink became a swirling vortex of black, a direct, brutal path between the Soul Palace, where they had gathered Squad 0, and the endless desert of the Hollows. Naruto led the charge, plunging into the void first. He was flanked by the 5 members of the Royal Guard. Behind them came Shunsui, Byakuya Kuchiki, and Toshiro Hitsugaya, the captains who had been able to mobilize the fastest. They emerged into the pale, stagnant moonlight of Hueco Mundo. The air was dead and dry, the ground an endless sea of white sand. The scene before them was one of alien horror. The sky was riddled with dozens of black portals, the jagged mouths of Gargantas. From them streamed figures clad in white, their features aristocratic and cold. Their chakra signatures powerful and utterly foreign. They moved with silent, devastating efficiency. But it was what they were doing that turned the stomach. They weren't fighting the hollows that swarmed to meet them. They were harvesting them. Some of the invaders wielded strange staffs that fired beams of light, and any hollow caught in the beam would dissolve into motes of pure energy, which were then drawn into crystalline containers on the invaders' backs. Others used techniques that looked like a twisted form of jutsu, creating black receivers that pinned hollows in place before draining them dry. The sands were littered not with bodies, but with patches of bleached, sterile ground where souls had ceased to be. In the center of the invading force, a figure floated leisurely on a cloud of sand, observing the harvest with an air of detached amusement. He had pale blue hair, a fishing rod with a glowing red hook slung over his shoulder, and a rinnegan in one eye. His smile was predatory and mocking. Well, Arashiki Otsutsuki said, his voice carrying across the desert. Look what the cat dragged in. A king and his royal guard dogs. We were wondering when you'd show up to the party. Party's over, Naruto growled, his golden aura flaring to life. Get out of this world. Arashiki laughed, a high, unpleasant sound. Oh, but we've only just begun our sampling. Lord Ashiki requires a great deal of energy for his ascension. And this realm is simply overflowing with untapped potential. It's a feast. At a gesture from Naruto, the counterattack began. It was a clash of titans. The members of Squad 0, unleashed for the first time in centuries, were forces of nature. Tenjiro Kirinji moved in a blur of motion, his healing waters turning scalding hot. Boiling invaders from the inside out before they could even react. Etsu Namaya was a whirlwind of steel, his Saifushi, a blade so sharp it required no sheath, cleaving through the Otsutsuki's advanced defenses as if they were paper. Byakuya and Hitsugaya worked in tandem, one unleashing a storm of 1,000 pink, razor-sharp petals, the other a glacier of crushing ice. Shunsui was a shadow, high-s twin blades appearing and disappearing, felling enemies with a lethal, playful grace. But all eyes were on the king and the weaver. Naruto charged straight into the thickest part of the fighting, a golden comet of righteous fury. He moved faster than any of them, a blur of motion, creating and dismissing shadow clones in a dizzying display of tactical chaos. A Bijudama Rasenshuriken, massive and screaming with power, ripped through a squadron of harvesters, the ensuing explosion not just killing them, but wiping their very existence from the timeline, a taste of their own medicine. Senjumaru moved beside him, a stark contrast of deadly grace. She didn't engage in direct combat. She was a controller, a conceptual warrior. As one of the Otsutsuki fired a concentrated beam of destructive energy at Naruto. One of Senjumaru's 6 skeletal arms shot forward. From its fingertip, a single, near-invisible silk thread emerged. It caught the beam midair. And then she pulled. The beam, a cohesive blast of pure power, unraveled. It came apart like a cheap sweater, its destructive energy dissipating into a harmless, glittering cloud of individual reishi particles. Their attacks are a weave of chakra and spiritual energy. She commented to Naruto, her voice perfectly calm amidst the chaos. A complex weave, but a weave nonetheless. And any weave can be unspooled. Their synergy was immediate, instinctive. Naruto was the spearhead, the overwhelming offensive force that drew all the attention and broke the enemy's formations. Senjumaru was the shield, the perfect defense, moving with him. Her skeletal arms a blur as she deconstructed every energy-based attack sent their way. She would ensnare enemies in nets of razor-sharp thread, holding them immobile for a fraction of a second, the time Naruto needed to obliterate them with a Rasengan. He created openings, and she exploited them. She created defenses, and he used them as a staging ground for his next assault. They fought without speaking, communicating with shared glances and a deep, innate understanding of each other's rhythm. It was a deadly, beautiful dance. A whirlwind and a weaver, moving as one. Arashiki watched from his perch, his amused expression slowly souring into one of irritation as his forces were systematically dismantled. Pathetic, he sneered. A useless harvest. He fixed his gaze on Naruto. You, the replacement king, you're the real prize. He flicked his wrist, and the red hook of his fishing line shot out, not as a physical projectile, but as a tendril of pure energy that phased through space. Appearing directly in front of Naruto's chest. Before Naruto could even react, a wall of black and gold silk, woven in an instant from thin air by Senjumaru's loom, appeared before him. The hook slammed into it, and for a moment, it held. But this attack was different. It wasn't just energy, it was a conceptual hook, designed to rip a soul from its body. The hook began to tear through the woven defense. Naruto didn't hesitate. He placed a hand on Senjumaru's shoulder. Got it. In the next instant, he used the Hiraishin, a technique he had mastered long ago but rarely used, teleporting them both 20 yards to the left. The hook ripped through the now empty space, its power dissipating harmlessly. Arashiki's eyes widened in genuine surprise. That technique, the second Hokage's art. How does a creature like you possess it? I'm full of surprises, Naruto called back, forming another Rasengan. The battle was turning into a rout. The Otsutsuki vanguard, for all their advanced power, were not prepared for the sheer ferocity and strange abilities of the Soul Society's strongest. They were harvesters, not soldiers, and they were being systematically exterminated. Arashiki clicked his tongue in annoyance. This has ceased to be productive. He raised a hand, and a swirling, distorted portal, a gateway back to his own dimension, tore open behind him. The surviving members of his clan began to fall back, disengaging from the fight. You're not getting away, Naruto yelled, preparing to charge. Oh, I'm not worried, Arashiki called back, a smug, chilling smile returning to his face. This was never an invasion. Your Majesty, it was an appetizer, a taste test. We came to confirm the flavor of this reality's souls and to measure the strength of its new core. He floated backward into the portal, his form beginning to distort. And now we know, his voice echoed, laced with a triumphant, cosmic hunger. We know you are ripe for the harvest. Lord Ashiki will be so pleased. He has waited millennia to unchain reality, and you, Naruto Uzumaki, are the key. He will consume you, Collapse these pathetic, segregated worlds into the primordial soup they were meant to be, and from that chaos, our clan will achieve true godhood. The portal snapped shut, leaving behind only the dead air, the sterile white sand, and a silence that was heavier than any scream. The fight was over. They had won. They had repelled the invaders. But as the members of Squad 0 and the Gote 13 regrouped, there was no sense of victory. They stood amidst the evidence of the Otsutsuki's horrifying efficiency, looking at the empty spot in the sky where their true enemy had delivered his declaration of war. Naruto stood beside Senjumaru, looking out over the scarred desert. His hands were clenched into fists. He had faced down gods and monsters, fought in wars that decided the fate of his world. But this was different. This wasn't a fight for a village, or a nation, or even a planet. Ashiki Otsutsuki didn't want to rule. He didn't want to conquer. He wanted to eat reality. And Naruto, the new Soul King, was the main course. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Price of Balance. The return to the Soul Society was not triumphant. The black vortex of Ikebe's ink closed behind them, sealing away the dead, white sands of Hueco Mundo, but the chilling silence of that empty desert followed them back. There were no cheers for their victory, no celebrations for repelling the invaders. There was only a grim, heavy understanding that the battle they had just won was a single skirmish in a war they hadn't even begun to comprehend. The assembled captains met in the main hall of the First Division, the air thick with tension. The Royal Guard stood apart, their presence a silent, imposing reminder of the stakes. Naruto stood at the head of the room, not on a dais or a throne, but on the same level as everyone else. Yet, all eyes were on him. He was no longer just a powerful anomaly, he was their commander. The one who had led them into the jaws of a new and terrifying enemy. Reports were already pouring in, delivered by frantic messengers from the 12th Division's monitoring stations. The news was uniformly bad. Captain Kuritsuchi's initial assessment was correct, a subordinate of Mayuri's reported, his voice tight with stress as he read from a flickering data scroll. The mass eradication of souls in Hueco Mundo has created a systemic imbalance. The flow is wrong. It's like a major artery has been severed. The whole system is trying to compensate, and it's failing. Put it in plain language. Toshiro Hitsugaya commanded, his young face set in a grim mask. What's happening? The messenger swallowed hard. We're calling it Soul Bleed. The barrier between the world of the living and the Soul Society is becoming porous. Weak. In high-density population centers, Tokyo, New York, London, we are seeing an unprecedented number of pluses being pulled across prematurely. Their chains of fate are snapping before their time. They're just appearing in the Rukongai, confused and terrified. A wave of murmurs went through the assembled Shinigami. This was a violation of natural order on a scale they had never seen. It gets worse, the messenger continued, his voice trembling slightly. The weakened barrier is a two-way street. Hollows are manifesting in the human world at a rate 500% above normal. Our Karakura town detachment is already completely overwhelmed. They're reporting Manos Grande-class hollows appearing in broad daylight. It's chaos. Naruto's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He could feel it. Through his connection to the throne, the universal hum of existence he was so accustomed to had developed a discordant, painful thrum. He could feel the confusion and terror of the souls being ripped from their lives, the raw hunger of the hollows unleashed upon a defenseless world. He felt every single death as a faint, sharp sting in his own soul. What are we doing about it? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Shunsui Kyoraku stepped forward, his usual lazy demeanor replaced by a heavy weariness. We're doing everything we can. Every available Shinigami has been dispatched to the world of the living to perform soul burials and combat the hollows. But we're plugging leaks in a dam that's about to burst. We're treating the symptoms, not the cause. The cause is the imbalance, Byakuya Kuchiki stated, his voice as cold and precise as ever. To restore the barrier, we must restore the balance. We must thin the herd. Increase the number of souls being guided from the human world to offset the loss from Hueco Mundo. Naruto stared at him, horrified. You want to start killing humans? Of course not, Byakuya replied, his gaze unwavering. We would simply lower the threshold. Target areas with high concentrations of aged or terminally ill souls and hasten their passage. It is a distasteful but necessary correction too. No, Naruto cut him off, the single word ringing with absolute authority. Absolutely not. We are not going to hasten anyone's death. We don't have the right. There has to be another way. There is, Mayuri Kuretsuchi said, stepping forward with a manic gleam in his eyes. A far more efficient solution. The Rukongai is dangerously overpopulated as it is. A controlled culling of, say, 30,000 souls from the outer districts would provide an immediate and effective counterbalance. I have already developed a nerve agent that would accomplish the task with minimal fuss and... Enough! Naruto roared. The sheer force of his spiritual pressure slammed into the room, making the very air vibrate. The captains, even Mayuri, fell silent. The golden energy of his sage mode flared around him, his eyes blazing with fury. Are you listening to yourselves? Culling, thinning the herd. You're talking about living beings like their numbers in an equation. Every one of those souls is a person. We are not going to murder the people we're sworn to protect to solve a problem we didn't create. The room was silent, the captains taken aback by the raw, moral fury of their new king. Ikebe Hyasube, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke, his deep voice cutting through the tension. He is right. Such actions are beneath us. They are a solution of last resort, a path from which there is no return. But the king's outrage does not change the reality of the situation. The dam is breaking. If we do not act, the worlds will merge into a chaotic morass. All will be lost. So what do we do? Naruto demanded, turning his glare on the ancient monk. What's your great solution? We cannot plug every hole, Ikebe said calmly. But we can reinforce the weakest points of the dam. The Kido Corps, working with the Royal Guard's own Kiryu Hakafuna, can create a series of powerful reinforcement barriers. They can stabilize the areas of greatest weakness and prevent a full-scale collapse. However, the energy and personnel required for such a task are immense. To create these safe zones, we would have to pull all our forces from other, less critical areas. Naruto felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He knew what was coming. Shunsui unrolled a large map of the human world on the central table. It was covered in glowing red spots, marking the locations of the soul bleeds and hollow manifestations. These are the 5 most critical points, he said, pointing to densely populated areas over Japan, Europe, and North America. If these go, the whole barrier shatters. We can reinforce them. We can save them. He then tapped a dozen smaller, fainter red spots scattered across the globe, smaller cities, towns, rural communities. To save them, he said, his voice heavy with regret. We would have to abandon these areas completely. Recall all Shinigami currently stationed there and divert them to the reinforcement effort. We would be writing these places off. We would be sacrificing them. Naruto stared at the map, at the dots that represented millions of lives. They wanted him to choose. To sit here in this safe, fortified city and sign the death warrant for entire communities. It went against every fiber of his being, every promise he had ever made, every battle he had ever fought. His defining principle was that he never gave up on anyone. No, he said, his voice thick. I won't do it. I'll go myself. I'll make 1,000,000 clones. We'll go to every single one of those places and hold the line. You cannot. Senjumaru's voice cut in, sharp and clear from her position near the wall. Your power is immense, but it is not infinite. To divide your energy so thinly across the globe would render each clone useless against a Manos class threat. Furthermore, your primary function is to act as the anchor. If you were to fully commit your own power to the world of the living, the instability at the core would magnify. The Soul Palace itself could begin to crumble. You would be abandoning your post. Every solution he proposed, every desperate plan he concocted, was shot down by the cold, brutal logic of his new reality. He was the most powerful being in existence. And he was helpless. He was a god in a cage, forced to watch the world burn. He looked around the room at the faces of the captains. They were grim, but they were resolute. They had accepted the terrible calculus of their duty. They were soldiers, and they understood triage. They were waiting for his command. The weight of it all, the sheer, crushing weight of 1,000,000,000 lives resting on his decision, pressed down on him. He felt the sting of tears in his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. A king could not weep. A king had to choose. He stared at the map, at the names of towns and cities full of people who had no idea their fates were being decided in a room a world away. He remembered the faces from his own village, the ramen vendors, the kids at the academy, the old folks who used to glare at him and now smiled. He had fought to protect them all. Now, he had to choose which ones to let die. With a ragged breath that felt like it was tearing his soul in two, he spoke. His voice was a dead, hollow thing, stripped of all its usual life and fire. Do it, he whispered. Reinforce the main points. Save who you can. The order was given. The sentence was passed. A collective, silent sigh of relief and regret passed through the room. The captains bowed their heads in acknowledgement and began to disperse, their grim duty laid out before them. Naruto didn't move. He just stood there, staring at the map, at the places he had just condemned. He had never felt so monstrous. He was no better than the enemies he had fought, men who had justified their cities with the promise of a greater good. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Shunsui. For what it's worth, the captain commander said quietly, his voice filled with a genuine, weary sympathy. That was the hardest decision a leader ever has to make. And you made the right one. You saved billions. Naruto couldn't answer. He shook his head, shrugged off the hand, and turned. He walked out of the hall. His movements stiff and robotic. He needed to be alone. He needed to get away from the looks of grim approval, from the reality of what he had just done. Using his own connection to the Soul Palace, he simply stepped. Not a shunpo, but a direct translocation. One moment he was in the Seraite, the next he was standing in his private chambers at the apex of all creation. The room was vast and silent, its walls made of the same star-flecked obsidian as the throne platform. A single, wide balcony looked out over the swirling cosmos, the Soul Society a shimmering jewel far, far below. He walked to the edge and gripped the railing, his knuckles turning white. The psychic stings of dying souls were already beginning, a faint but persistent chorus of pain at the edge of his consciousness. He hadn't just given an order. He could feel the consequences. He could feel the terror of a family in a small town in Ohio as a hollow tore through their home, a place where a Shinigami had been stationed only hours before. He could feel the last, fading breath of an old man in a village in India, his soul pulled prematurely from his body by the unstable barrier. He had become a god of death, presiding over a spreadsheet of acceptable losses. He slammed his fist against the railing, a wave of raw, uncontrolled power cracking the otherworldly stone. Is this what it means? He yelled into the void, his voice raw with anguish. Is this what it takes? To be cold, to be cruel, to be a monster? He sank to his knees, his head bowed, overwhelmed by the grief and the guilt. He was losing himself. The Naruto who would have charged in recklessly, who would have found some impossible, third option through sheer force of will, was being eroded away, replaced by this cold, pragmatic king who sacrificed the few for the many. He was afraid of the man this throne was turning him into. A soft, silken rustle sounded behind him. He didn't have to look. He knew her spiritual signature, the calm, intricate pattern of her presence. They call it the tyranny of command, Senjumaru said, her voice quiet, devoid of her usual sharp edge. She didn't approach him, but stood a respectful distance away. The burden of making choices where every option is a tragedy. Did you come here to tell me I did the right thing? He bit out, not looking at her. To tell me it was necessary. I don't want to hear it. No, she said softly. I came to tell you that it was a horrific, monstrous choice. And that it was the only one you had. There is no comfort in it. There shouldn't be. He finally looked over his shoulder at her. Her face was, as always, unreadable, but her eyes held a depth of understanding that went beyond mere sympathy. She had seen this before. How do you do it? He asked, his voice cracking. How do you live with it? All of you. You've been doing this for thousands of years. Does it ever get easier? She walked slowly toward him, her movements fluid and deliberate, and knelt beside him on the balcony. She looked not at him, but out at the cosmos, at the shimmering world below that they were tasked to protect. No, she said, her voice a low murmur. It never gets easier. The day it becomes easy is the day you are no longer fit for the duty. The day the numbers on the map stop feeling like people is the day you become the monster you fear. She paused, gathering her thoughts. 1,000 years ago, during a great war against a rebellion from within the Soul Society, the rebels created a weapon that fed on the souls of children. It grew stronger with every life it consumed. We were losing. The captain commander at the time, a man of immense principle and honor, was faced with a choice. He could detonate a keto bomb that would destroy the weapon and the rebels. But it would also incinerate the entire district they occupied, including a school full of children they were using as a power source. Her gaze was distant, lost in a memory that was still painfully sharp. He agonized for a week while the weapon grew stronger. Finally, he gave the order. The district was wiped from existence. The war was won. The Soul Society was saved. And 2 days later, he took his own life. He could not live with the choice he had made, even though it was the right one. She finally turned her head, her sharp, intelligent eyes meeting his. His mistake was not in making the choice. His mistake was believing he had to bear it alone. Naruto stared at her, at the unexpected, profound vulnerability she was showing him. She wasn't just giving him a history lesson. She was offering him an anchor. Your grief, she continued, her voice barely a whisper, the fact that this decision is tearing you apart, is not a weakness, Naruto Uzumaki. It is your greatest strength. It is the proof that the man is still stronger than the king. It is the proof that our world is in the right hands. He felt the hard, painful knot of guilt in his chest loosen, just a fraction. He wasn't being absolved, but he was being understood. Deeply, completely understood. I'm afraid, he confessed, the words quiet in the vast emptiness of the palace. I'm afraid of what I'm becoming. Then don't become it alone, she replied. She reached out, her pale, slender hand hesitating for a moment before gently resting on his clenched fist on the railing. Her touch was cool, like silk. But a strange warmth spread from it, chasing away some of the cold that had settled in his soul. The rest of us, we are the royal guard. Our duty is to the office. To the king. But my faith, my faith is in the man who cries for the souls he couldn't save. In that moment, under the silent gaze of 1,000 swirling nebulas, something shifted between them. The wall of duty and decorum, of pragmatism and titles, crumbled away, leaving two lonely, burdened souls finding solace in each other's presence. He was the sage king, the anchor of reality. She was the great weaver, a warden of the heavens. But right now, they were just Naruto and Senjumaru. And for the first time since he had woken up in this impossible world, he didn't feel completely alone. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A Conspiracy of Silk and Shadow. In the days that followed the sacrifice, a funereal pall settled over the Seraite. The frantic energy of the crisis was replaced by a grim, grinding routine. Squads earned from the world of the living with haunted eyes, their numbers thinned not by battle, but by the sheer, overwhelming tide of their new duties. The Kido Corps, under the direct supervision of Kiryu Hakafuna, who had descended from the Soul Palace, worked tirelessly, erecting shimmering walls of light and complex formulae around the designated safe zones. They were saving billions, but the NCE from the abandoned sectors was a weight on every soul. Naruto felt it most of all. The psychic stings of fading lives had become a constant, dull ache in his spirit. He bore it in silence, a self-imposed penance. He spent his time with Aikido, learning the deep, esoteric lore of his position, of the flow of souls, of the mechanics of the balance. He learned not to be a king, but to be the system itself. It was a cold, lonely education. His only respite was his time with Senjumaru. They spoke little of the decision, but she would find him on his balcony overlooking the cosmos, bringing him strange, fragrant teas from her own garden or simply sitting in silence with him, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm of his guilt. Their bond was solidifying, forged not in flirtation or romance, but in the crucible of shared, impossible burdens. But while the soldiers and the king mourned, the politicians schemed. Lord Kianari Sazanami saw not a tragedy, but a golden opportunity. Naruto's choice, the cold, brutal calculus he had been forced to make, was the perfect weapon. In the hushed, incense-filled halls of his family estate, he gathered the wavering members of the lesser nobility. Those whose pride and traditionalism had been chafing under the rule of an outsider. Do you see now? Kianari's voice was a smooth, silken poison, weaving its way into the hearts of his guests. I warned you. I warned you that a human could not comprehend the sacred duty of the king. He does not see souls, he sees acceptable losses. He sacrifices our people not with a heavy heart, but with the cold detachment of a butcher. He let the words hang in the air, letting them fester. He fights like a beast, not a king. He ignores our traditions. And now, he has condemned thousands to the horrors of the hollows to save his own strength. He is not a protector. He is a cancer, a blight on the very soul of our society. The royal guard, in their desperation, have made a catastrophic error. It falls to us, the true guardians of this world's heritage, to correct it. An old, wizened lord, head of a family almost as ancient as Kianeri's, shifted nervously. Correct it how, Lord Sazanami? To challenge him openly is suicide. You saw what he did to Captain Zaraki. Kianeri smiled, a thin, predatory expression. The beast is strong, I grant you. One does not fight a rabid dog with their bare hands. You fight it with intelligence. With a cage. You do not kill it, you defang it. He unrolled a scroll of ancient, yellowed parchment on the low table. On it was a complex diagram, a web of Keto, runes and spiritual channels that made the air in the room crackle. This, Kianeri announced with theatrical reverence, is a relic from the age of the first nobles. The sealing of the foundation. It is a ritual that does not attack the king's body, but his authority. It targets the spiritual conduits, the very ley lines that connect the throne in the heavens to the Seraite, its foundation on earth. Once the ritual is complete, his connection to the realms will be severed. He will still be on the throne, but he will be a king in name only. A powerless figurehead, a puppet whose strings we will hold. The assembled nobles stared, a mixture of fear and greedy ambition in their eyes. This was not assassination. This was a coup of conceptual, spiritual warfare. It was elegant. It was insidious. It was perfect. The ritual requires immense spiritual power, Kianeri explained, channeled by at least 20 individuals of noble blood into a master seal hidden deep within the foundations of the central 46 chambers. The upcoming rite of celestial purification, a ceremony to cleanse the Seraite of the recent, negative energies, provides the perfect cover. While the Gote 13 and the Royal Guard are distracted by the public ceremony, we, the true patriots, will be in the catacombs below, saving our world. His speech was convincing. His plan was sound. But he had made one critical miscalculation. He believed the Royal Guard was merely a collection of powerful fighters. He had no conception of the true nature of Senjumaru Shutara. She was not just a weaver of cloth. She wove threads of information. Over the millennia, she had cultivated a network of spies and informants so subtle, so deeply embedded in the Seraite's society, that no one even knew it existed. They were not Shinigami or nobles. They were the people no one ever looked at twice. The servants who polished the floors in noble estates, the artisans who mended the ceremonial robes, the cooks who prepared the banquets. They saw and heard everything. 2 days before the rite of purification, a simple delivery boy arrived at Senjumaru's Seraite workshop. He brought a bolt of plain, undyed cotton, an order for the 4th Division's medical ward. He bowed, left the cloth on her counter, and departed without a word. Senjumaru waited until he was gone, then ran her slender fingers over the seemingly plain fabric. Her eyes narrowed. To anyone else, it was simple cotton. To her, it was a letter. The very weave of the threads was a complex cipher, its warp and weft forming patterns of coded language only she could read. A whispered conversation overheard, a glimpse of a forbidden scroll. The names of conspirators, the time and place of their treason. Her face, usually a placid mask, hardened into one of cold, lethal fury. She didn't raise an alarm. She didn't report it to the captain commander. She rolled the bolt of cloth under her arm and took a direct path to the heavens. Naruto was on the balcony when she arrived, watching the distant, swirling nebulae. He had grown accustomed to her silent appearances, but this time was different. He felt the sharp, dangerous edge to her spiritual pressure before he even turned around. "What is it?" he asked, his own senses instantly on high alert. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She unrolled the bolt of cotton on the obsidian floor. Lord Kianeri is planning a coup. She laid out the entire plot as she had deciphered it from the threads, the ritual, the timing, the location, the goal. She spoke with a cold, clipped precision, her voice a weapon in its own right. Naruto listened, his expression growing darker with every word. The guilt that had haunted him for days was burned away by a rising tide of cold anger. While he was grieving the people he had been forced to sacrifice, these nobles were using that sacrifice as a justification for treason. They want to make me a puppet, he said, the words a low growl. They believe they are saving the Soul Society from a tyrant, Senjumaru corrected. Their arrogance has blinded them to the fact that their actions would destabilize the realms far more than anything the Otsutsuki have done. To sever your connection would be to snap the anchor chain in the midst of a hurricane. They would doom us all out of sheer, pathetic pride. So what do we do? Naruto asked, his mind already shifting into a familiar, tactical mode. We can't just arrest them. They'll deny everything. It's their word against a piece of cloth. No, Senjumaru said, a dangerous glint in her eyes. We will not arrest them. We will let them spring their trap. And we will watch as it closes upon them. The day of the rite of celestial purification was solemn and grand. The main courtyard of the first Devi Scion was filled with the ranked officers of the Gote 13, all in their dress uniforms. The great noble houses were in attendance. Even Naruto, flanked by the 5 members of the royal guard, had nded from the Soul Palace to observe the ceremony, a gesture Kianeri's faction secretly took as a sign of the king's arrogance and overconfidence. Lord Kianeri and his company conspirators were the picture of piety, leading the chants. Their faces masks of solemn duty. No one saw them subtly peel away from the main ceremony in small groups of 2 and 3, slipping through forgotten corridors to the catacombs beneath Central 46. They gathered in a circular, stone chamber, the air thick with the dust of ages. On the floor, an ancient, complex ritual circle, previously hidden by a false stone, now pulsed with a faint, malevolent light. It is time, Kianeri whispered, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and triumphant ambition. The king sits distracted on his high perch. Begin the channeling. The 20 nobles took their places around the circle. They began to pour their own spiritual energy into the runes, a low hum filling the chamber. The circle on the floor began to glow brighter. The lines of the seal burning with a sickly purple light. A thin, almost invisible tendril of energy rose from the center of the circle, phasing through the stone ceiling, seeking the spiritual lines of the Seraite to poison them. It is working. One of the lords hissed with glee. His power will be ours to command. Indeed, it is, a calm voice said from the shadows. The conspirators froze. From the single, arched doorway of the chamber, figures emerged. Not just any figures. Captain Commander Shunsui Kyoraku, a grim-faced Byakuya Kuchiki, and a dozen other captains of the Gote 13. They sealed the exit, their faces masks of cold fury. Kianeri's blood ran cold. How? This is impossible. You really thought you could orchestrate a coup in our city and we wouldn't notice? Shunsui said, his voice losing all of its usual laziness. You nobles talk too much. But the true shock came from the center of the room. The ritual circle, which they had been pouring their power into, began to change. The sickly purple glow shifted, turning into a brilliant, intricate gold. The runes reconfigured themselves, their lines of Kido twisting into a new, inescapable pattern. What is this? Kianeri shrieked, trying to pull his hands back, only to find his spiritual energy being drawn from him, held fast by the seal. From the very air beside the circle, Senjumaru Shutara shimmered into existence. Her 6 skeletal arms were extended, each one holding a glowing, golden needle of solidified energy. This is not your sealing of the foundation, she explained, her voice echoing in the trapped silence. That seal was a crude, brutish thing. I took the liberty of improving it. The threads of Kido you were channeling were rewoven the moment they left your bodies. You have not been powering a weapon. You have been powering your own prison. As she spoke, the golden light from the circle shot upward, forming a cage of shimmering bars around the 20 trapped nobles. Their spiritual pressure was completely suppressed, their connection to their own power severed by the very ritual they had sought to use on another. And then, Naruto walked into the room. He didn't radiate power. He didn't look angry. He simply looked disappointed. He walked to the edge of the golden cage and looked at Lord Kianeri, whose face was a mask of disbelief and terror. You did all this, Naruto said. His voice quiet but carrying the weight of a collapsing mountain, because you were afraid. Afraid of change. Afraid of a king who gets his hands dirty. You talked about my cold detachment. But you don't have a clue what that choice cost me. You were a monster. Kianari spat, his last vestiges of defiance flaring. A human playing at being a god. You would have led us all to ruin. No, Naruto said, shaking his head. A monster is someone who would risk the end of the world for the sake of his own pride. A monster is someone who would doom billions because he can't stand to see someone else in charge. He looked around at the other trapped nobles, at the fear and shame on their faces. He turned to Shunsui, Lord Kianari and the 4 heads of the other clans who helped him. Led this will be imprisoned in the Mukan. For treason against the Soul King and endangering the balance of the realms. Then he looked back at the 15 remaining nobles, the followers, the ones who had been swayed by fear and ambition. The rest of you, you have a choice. You can join them in the darkness. Or you can confess your treason, swear a new, binding oath of fealty to the Soul Society, not to me. But to the world we are all meant to protect, and you will be granted amnesty. You will spend the next century on reinforcement duty in the world of the living, seeing with your own eyes the people whose lives you gambled away. You will learn what it truly means to protect. It was a masterful stroke. He had shown strength by punishing the ringleaders with the harshest possible sentence. And he had shown mercy and wisdom by offering a path to redemption for the rest, turning his enemies into servants of the cause and shattering the noble conspiracy in a single blow. As the captains began to process the prisoners, the tense atmosphere began to ease. The internal threat was over. And that was when the sky fell. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. A colossal, alien spiritual press. You were descended upon the entire Soul Society. It was a pressure so immense, so ancient and cold, that it made Naruto's own feel like a candle flame in a blizzard. Every Shinigami in the Seraite, from the newest recruit to the captain commander, froze in place, their instincts screaming at them that a predator of an unimaginable scale had just fixed its gaze upon them. In the sky above the Seraite, reality itself seemed to crack. Not a garganta, not a portal, but a shimmering, vertical fissure in the very fabric of space opened up. Through it, they could see not another dimension, but a figure. A man with calm, aristocratic features, stark white hair, and a 10-pronged horn crown. He wore simple white robes, and one of his eyes was a normal, piercing blue, while the other was a golden rinnegan with a pattern like a sun. It was a Shiki Otsutsuki. He wasn't there, but he was looking in, his presence a physical weight that buckled the knees of lesser souls. He did not shout. His voice was calm, conversational. But it echoed not in their ears, but directly in their minds, a telepathic broadcast to every soul in the realm. Less than so, this is the Soul Society. Quaint. And that must be the replacement. Greater than. His gaze, cold and analytical, fell from the sky and seemed to pierce through the very rock, fixing on Naruto in the chamber below. Less than Naruto Uzumaki. I have been watching your progress. You have strength. It is a shame it is all in service to this cage. Greater than. What do you want? Naruto projected back, his own power flaring to resist the crushing mental pressure. Less than want. I want what is natural. The primordial state. Before this, balance, was imposed. Before life was segregated into these pathetic little ponds, weakening it, stagnating it. I want to return all things to the great ocean. Greater than. The fissure in the sky widened. And through it, they could see the vast, empty space between dimensions, and behind a Shiki, a fleet of Otsutsuki vessels that blotted out the void. Less than your predecessor was. An arrogant fool who saw himself as a shepherd. He built fences to keep the sheep safe. I am here to tear down the fences and remind the sheep that they can be wolves. This cycle of life and death, his separation of worlds, it is a prison that stifles evolution. By consuming the king, the linchpin, I will collapse the walls. All souls, human, hollow, and Shinigami, will be merged into a single, glorious, chaotic state of being. From that crucible, true godhood will be born. True freedom. Greater than. He looked directly at Naruto again, his voice resonating with the finality of a cosmic decree. Less than I have declared my war not on you, but on your office, not on your people, but on the order that binds them. You have one chance. Surrender your power. Become the willing sacrifice for the liberation of all existence. Or, I will come and take it. And I will harvest every soul in every one of your precious realms as an appetizer before the main course. Greater than. The fissure snapped shut. The pressure vanished. The sky returned to normal. But nothing was the same. In the silent, stunned chamber below the Seraite, surrounded by his defeated internal enemies, Naruto Uzumaki, the Sage King, looked up at the empty sky. The chilling ultimatum echoing in his soul. The conspiracy was over. The war had just been declared. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. War on the Celestial Plane. Ashiki's voice did not fade. It lingered, an oily residue in the minds of everyone in the Seraite, a psychic scar left by a being of unimaginable power. For a frozen moment, the world held its breath. The captured nobles in their cage of golden light trembled. Their petty conspiracy rendered utterly insignificant. The captains stood like statues, the sheer scale of the threat threatening to overwhelm them. Naruto was the first to break the silence. He turned away from the sky, his eyes burning with a cold, clear fire. The fear and guilt were gone, replaced by the grim, unshakable resolve of a man who had found his true enemy. He's not waiting, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. That wasn't an ultimatum. That was a distraction. As the words left his lips, a tremor ran through the very foundations of the world. It wasn't an earthquake. It was deeper, more fundamental. A violent lurch in reality itself. Far above, in the hidden royal realm, the Soul Palace shuddered. A psychic scream, a wave of pure alarm, washed down from the heavens, felt by every soul in the Seraite. Ikebe Hyasube's eyes snapped open wide, the ancient calm in his expression shattering. They are not attacking the Seraite, he boomed, his voice a thunderclap that shook the chamber. They are striking at the heart, at the palace itself. They're going straight for the throne, Senjumaru finished, her face a mask of cold fury. Her 6 skeletal arms unfolded behind her, each one clenched into a fist. They intend to decapitate the snake. There was no time for a war council, no time for strategy. The war was already here. Get us up there, Naruto commanded Ikebe. It is not so simple. The monk replied, his gaze fixed on the heavens. They are surrounding the palace, weaving a net of their own foul energy to block passage. To open a gate large enough for all of us would take time we do not have. Then send us, Senjumaru said, gesturing to the 5 members of the royal guard. We are the shield of the king. We will hold the line. Etsunamiya grinned, a flash of feral excitement in his eyes. He drew his shapeless Zanpakuto, Saifushi. It's been a while since I got to really stretch my legs. Let's give these space ghosts a welcome they won't forget. Ikebe nodded grimly. He raised his enormous brush, dipped it in an inkstone that seemed to hold the night sky itself, and painted a single, complex character in the air. The kanji for return blazed with black light, and a chaotic, swirling vortex tore open. Go. Buy us the time we need. Without a second's hesitation, the 5 members of Squad Zero leapt into the portal. Naruto moved to follow, but Shunsui put a hand on his arm. Your place is with them, I know, the captain commander said, his voice urgent. But you are also our king. Give us our orders. Naruto looked at the assembled captains, at their grim, determined faces. They were no longer suspicious or uncertain. They were his army. Hold the Seraite, he commanded, his voice ringing with authority. They may send a diversionary force. Do not let this city fall. Prepare every able-bodied Shinigami for war. And find a way to get your strongest fighters up to me. We're going to need everyone. He gave Shunsui a firm, grateful nod, then turned and plunged into the swirling vortex just as it snapped shut behind him. He emerged into chaos. The Soul Palace was no longer a serene, floating sanctuary. It was a battlefield. The air, once pure and thin, was thick with the stench of ozone and alien chakra. The swirling nebulas of the cosmos were obscured by the jagged, black wounds of Otsutsuki portals. From these portals poured an army, a legion of white-clad figures, their faces cold and impassive. These were not the harvesters from Hueco Mundo. These were soldiers, clad in armor that seemed to absorb the light, wielding weapons that hummed with a dangerous, unfamiliar energy. The 5 members of the Royal Guard were already engaged, and the sight was terrifyingly beautiful. They were not just fighting. They were demonstrating why they held their titles. Tenjiro Kirinji was a blur of impossible speed, his white Haori a stark contrast to the crimson sprays he left in his wake. He wasn't healing. He was using his mastery over blood and water to kill. An Otsutsuki warrior lunged at him, and Tenjiro simply pointed. The invader's own blood erupted from his body, turning into 1,000 razor-sharp needles of ice that shredded him from the inside out. He moved through the enemy ranks like a plague, a force of nature that could not be contained. Kiryu Hakafuna stood before the main gate to the king's chambers, a massive, ornate ladle in her hands. She had slammed it into the ground, and from it grew a colossal cage of interwoven, glowing yellow branches, her cage of life. Expanded to a monumental scale, it had trapped an entire battalion of Otsutsuki, and she was currently ladling enormous globs of a super-concentrated, life-giving porridge into the cage. The sheer richness of the ryutsu causing the trapped soldiers' bodies to swell and burst like overripe fruit. It was grotesque, and it was brutally effective. Etsu Namaya was dancing. There was no other word for it. He moved with a loose-limbed, hip-hop rhythm, his blade a silver flicker in the chaos. His opponents couldn't even touch him. Their energy blasts were sliced in half. The IR defensive shields were parted like curtains. Their phasing abilities, which should have made them intangible, were useless. Saifushi did not cut flesh, it cut the very concept of its target's existence. And Etsu wielded it with the casual, joyful mastery of a god at play. And then there was Ikeep. The monk stood before the empty throne, his massive brush in hand. He wasn't fighting, he was unnaming. An Otsutsuki general, wreathed in a powerful aura of black lightning, hurled a spear of solidified energy at him. Ikeep simply painted the air in front of the attack. His ink, blacker than the void, touched the spear. And the lightning vanished. The power was gone. The spear became a simple, powerless piece of black rock that clattered harmlessly to the floor. "You are now Black Rock," Ikeep intoned, and the general, stripped of his power's name, looked down at his hands in confusion, his aura gone. But for every enemy they felled, 2 more poured from the portals. The Otsutsuki were endless, a tide of white and black against the 5 pillars of the Soul Society. Squad 0 was holding, but they were being pushed back. Naruto landed in their midst, and his arrival was a clarion call. "Sorry I'm late." Traffic was a killer. A golden aura exploded from him, a sun rising on the celestial plane. He formed a Rasenshuriken in one hand, expanded it to the size of a small house, and hurled it into the largest of the Otsutsuki portals. The shriek of the attack tore through the air, and the portal destabilized, flickering violently before imploding with a silent, catastrophic F. Lash that took 100 enemy soldiers with it. "Show off," Etsu called out with a grin, not missing a beat as he sliced another opponent into non-existence. Naruto landed beside Senjumaru, who was using her threads to erect a complex, shimmering defensive web, catching enemy projectiles and unraveling them mid-flight. "Glad you could make it," she said, her tone as calm as ever, though her skeletal arms were moving at a speed that blurred the eye. "I was beginning to think you'd leave all the fun to us." "Never," he said, and they fell into the same effortless rhythm they'd found in Hueco Mundo. He was the storm. He created a dozen clones, each one a master of taijutsu and Rasengan, and sent them crashing into the enemy lines, sowing chaos and disruption. He was a whirlwind of gold and orange, his power a raw, overwhelming force. She was the calm eye of his storm. She moved with him, a shadow of deadly grace. Her threads were everywhere, not just defending, but attacking. A single, near-invisible strand would lash out and wrap around an Otsutsuki's neck. Before they could react, she would flick her wrist, and the thread would reweave the victim's own uniform, tightening it, constricting it, turning their own clothes into an inescapable, suffocating prison. She killed with the quiet, devastating precision of a spider in its web. But the Otsutsuki adapted. A new wave of soldiers emerged, larger and more powerful. They seemed to have analyzed Squad Zero's abilities. They kept their distance from Tenjiro's blood arts, used long-range attacks to bypass Etsu's blade, and attacked Ikeeb with pure physical force, avoiding energy-based techniques he could unname. And for Naruto and Senjumaru, they sent a monster. It was a hulking brute, easily 10 feet tall, its body a grotesque fusion of Otsutsuki physiology and the metallic, bone-white armor of an Arankar. It had 4 arms, and in each one, it held a crackling spear of energy. Its spiritual pressure was a match for a high-level captain. The beast roared and charged, ignoring Naruto's clones and heading straight for Senjumaru. The Weaver is the linchpin of their defense, it bellowed in a synthesized, grating voice. Eliminate her. Naruto moved to intercept, but 2 other Otsutsuki commanders appeared, their own power flaring as they engaged him, forcing him into a defensive fight. Senjumaru, he yelled. She didn't flinch. As the 4-armed brute swung its spears down in a devastating arc, she simply raised a hand. But Naruto felt a change. A shift in her power. A quiet, terrifying resolve. He had seen this look in his own teacher's eyes. The look that said a line had been crossed, and the time for holding back was over. Bankai, she said, her voice a soft, deadly whisper that seemed to cut through the roar of the battle. Reality fractured. From the ground around Senjumaru, a colossal structure of shimmering golden light erupted. It was a loom, a divine engine of creation and uncreation that stretched 100 meters into the sky. Its warped threads were the color of twilight, and its weft was the blinding white of a newborn star. An immense, half-finished tapestry hung from it, its patterns constantly shifting, depicting the battle they were in, but with subtle, terrifying differences. The area around them, a 500-meter radius, was now her domain. Sentei Kaihen no Hata, Shigarami no Kotowari. Loom of divine alteration, tangled principles. The 4-armed Otsutsuki's spears, which were about to crash down on her, simply stopped. They froze in midair, inches from her head. The brute stared in confusion. Its immense strength useless. In my world, Senjumaru stated, her voice now resonating with the power of the loom, the law of durability, is conditional. She made a subtle gesture with her fingers, as if plucking a thread on her divine loom. On the massive tapestry, the image of the brute's spears changed. Their texture shifted from crackling energy to brittle glass. In the real world, the 4 energy spears shattered into a million harmless shards of light. The brute roared in rage and lunged, trying to crush her with its fists. The law of momentum has been revised, Senjumaru said calmly. The monster's charge slowed, its movements becoming thick and sluggish as if it were moving through molasses. It was running with all its might, but it was barely moving an inch. Senjumaru simply stepped aside, and the law of cause and effect has been temporarily amended. She plucked another, deeper thread. On the tapestry, the image of the brute was shown tripping over its own feet. In reality, the monster, its own momentum now its enemy, stumbled over nothing, its massive body crashing to the ground with enough force to crack the obsidian floor. It was completely helpless, its strength, speed, and power rewritten, rendered meaningless by a higher authority. Senjumaru looked down at the fallen giant, her expression one of cold, divine judgment. This battle is an imperfect weave. Allow me to correct the flaws. One of her skeletal arms shot forward, a single black needle at its tip. She didn't stab the monster. She simply touched it. The needle wasn't a physical weapon. It was the needle of her loom, and with that touch, she unraveled the thread of the monster's life. It dissolved into dust, its story erased from the tapestry. Naruto stared in utter awe, momentarily forgetting his own fight. He had known she was powerful. He had not known she could rewrite reality on a whim. This was the true power of the Royal Guard. He felt a surge of energy, not from himself, but from the battlefield. A new hope, a new fire. Seeing her power, seeing the absolute conviction of his comrades, Naruto felt his own limitations fall away. He wasn't just a sage king who had inherited a title. He was Naruto Uzumaki, the child of prophecy, the savior of his own world. It was time to unite all of his warring parts into a single, cohesive whole. I am the anchor, he whispered to himself. I am the protector. I am the king. He closed his eyes. He reached inward, past Kurama's lingering chakra, past the gifts of the other 8 Biju. He reached outward, past the natural energy of the world, into the cosmic, boundless ryutsu of his new position. And he pulled them together. The golden aura around him condensed, solidified. It wasn't just a cloak of energy anymore. It was a suit of divine armor, gleaming with a light so pure it was painful to look at. The black markings of his 6 paths sage mode burned across the golden light like sacred text. Behind him, 9 truth-seeking orbs, not of chakra, but of pure, conceptual spiritual matter, materialized, humming with the power to negate anything they touched. His blue eyes now glowed with the white-hot intensity of stars. He had fused it all. He was no longer a shinobi using sage power, or a king learning his role. He was a new state of being. The sage god. He opened his eyes, and the two Otsutsuki commanders fighting him recoiled as if they'd been physically struck. Impossible, one of them stammered. Such power. Naruto didn't answer with words. He simply raised a hand. One of the truth-seeking orbs shot forward. Not with incredible speed, but with an inexorable certainty. The commander erected a shield of dark energy. The orb touched it, and the shield didn't shatter. It was unmade, wiped from existence. The orb passed through the commander's chest, and he looked down to see not a hole, but a spreading void where his soul was being erased. The war on the celestial plane had just found its true champions. A king of divine power and a weaver of impossible reality. A whirlwind and a loom, ready to unmake their enemies. Just as they prepared to press their advantage, a new sound cut through the chaos. A familiar, bloodthirsty roar. A garganta, crude and violent compared to the Otsutsuki portals, ripped open in the sky. From it leapt a dozen figures, the captains of the Gote 13. Kenpachi Zaraki was at the forefront, a new, sturdier-looking eye patch covering his right eye and a grin that promised bloody murder on his face. Byakuya Kuchiki, Toshiro Hitsugaya, Soifin, the Vizards, they were all there. Their bankai already flaring to life. Looks like you started the party without us. Kenpachi bellowed, his eyes locking onto the largest group of Otsutsuki soldiers. Don't worry, we're here to help. Reinforcements had arrived. The Soul Society was no longer divided. From the lowest-ranking Shinigami defending the Seraite to the king himself fighting in the heavens, they were one army. United against the void. Naruto looked at Senjumaru, who stood serene in the center of her reality-altering bankai. A silent understanding passed between them. Their love, their trust. It wasn't something spoken in quiet moments. It was this perfect, unspoken synergy on the battlefield. It was a weapon more powerful than any Rasengan, more absolute than any loom. The battle for the Soul Palace raged on, a symphony of destruction and impossible power. But the tide had turned. The heavens would not fall today. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The God Slayer's Gambit. The arrival of the Gote 13 was like a thunderclap breaking a fever. Their raw, unrestrained power surged into the battlefield, a chaotic but desperately needed reinforcement. Kenpachi Zaraki, laughing like a demon, was a whirlwind of destruction, his newly repaired Zanpakuto cleaving through Otsutsuki elites as if they were kindling. Byakuya's Senbon Sakura Kageyoshi became a storm of pink death, flowing across the celestial plane and shredding entire platoons. The war, which had been a desperate defense, now felt like a real fight. Naruto and Senjumaru stood at the epicenter of it all, the anchor point of the renewed charge. His sage god form blazed like a miniature sun, each movement erasing an enemy from existence. Her bankai held a vast swath of the battlefield in its thrall, the gray. At loom in the sky turning Otsutsuki battle law into a tangled, useless mess. Victory no longer felt impossible. It felt, for the first time, inevitable. And it was in that moment of hope that the real god arrived. The universe fell silent. The roar of Kenpachi's laughter died in his throat. The whisper of Byakuya's million blades ceased. The chaotic energy of battle, the shouts, the explosions, he clash of steel and spirit, it all vanished, smothered by a spiritual pressure so absolute, so ancient and cold, that it made everything else feel small and insignificant. A simple, perfect circle of blackness, no larger than a man, opened in the air above the empty throne. From it, a Shiki Otsutsuki stepped out, his feet touching the obsidian floor with a quiet finality. He was not a projection. He was here. His calm, aristocratic face held a look of profound disappointment, as if he'd arrived to find his children had made a mess of the house. He surveyed the scene, the royal guard, battered but unbowed. The captains of the Gote 13, their bankai raging, the half-destroyed landscape of his intended prize. He sighed, a sound that seemed to suck all the warmth from the air. An admirable effort, his voice echoed in their minds. Calm and clear. But this pest control is beneath me. I have come for the foundation, not the termites. With a gesture of casual, almost bored, dismissal, he raised one hand. The space between him and the Gote 13 captains seemed to compress. A dozen of the most powerful beings in the Soul Society, each one capable of leveling a city, were suddenly slammed backward as if hit by an invisible wall of force, their bankai flickering and dying under the sheer, suffocating pressure. Kenpachi was driven to one knee, snarling, the first time he had been stopped by sheer will alone. Ashiki paid them no more mind. His gaze, one piercing blue eye and one golden, patterned Rinnegan, fell upon Naruto. You have grown since our last conversation, little king, Ashiki mused. You have integrated the power of the linchpin into your soul. A commendable fusion, but you are still trying to repair the cage, when you should be helping me tear it down. He took a step forward, and the world warped around him. A shimmering, translucent barrier erupted, separating a vast, circular section of the throne room from the rest of the battlefield. Inside were only Ashiki and Naruto. Outside, everyone else could only watch, their attacks, their Kido, even their voices unable to penetrate the barrier. Ashiki had created his own private arena. Let us speak, you and I, Ashiki said. His tone that of a patient teacher. Protector to liberator. Let us settle the fate of these stagnant worlds. There's nothing to talk about, Naruto said, his truth-seeking orbs spinning slowly behind him. You want to destroy everything. I won't let you. Destruction. No, Ashiki corrected, a faint, condescending smile on his lips. Rebirth. You see a beautiful, orderly garden. I see a field of bonsai trees. Each one twisted and bound, its potential intentionally stunted to please the gardener. This, balance, you fight for is stagnation. An endless, repeating cycle that prevents any true evolution. It is a prison for every soul in existence. He began to walk in a slow circle, his hands clasped behind his back. You, of all people, should understand. You were an outcast, feared for the power caged within you. You fought to be free. Now, you stand as the warden of a far greater prison. You keep humans, hollows, and Shinigami in their little pens, enforcing a system that declares they must remain separate, unequal. I offer them the chance to merge, to struggle, to evolve into something greater. I offer them chaos, and chaos is the mother of all strength. Every word was a precisely aimed dart, designed to slip past his defenses and strike at his very core. He was using Naruto's own history, his own beliefs, against him. Freedom isn't chaos, Naruto shot back. It's the chance to live without fear. You want to throw everyone into a meat grinder and call the one who crawls out the winner. I want to give them a world where they don't have to fight just to survive. Ashiki chuckled. A noble sentiment. The sentiment of a sheep who has never considered what it is to be a wolf. You sacrificed thousands in the human world to maintain your precious balance. A good first step, but you wept for them. Your heart is still too soft. True progress requires a conviction you lack. The talk was over. Ashiki attacked. He didn't charge. He simply pointed a finger at a massive chunk of the palace floor that had been torn up in the earlier fighting. The chunk of rock, the size of a carriage, vanished. A split second later, it reappeared, full-sized, directly above Naruto's head. Naruto reacted instantly, one of his truth-seeking orbs flying up to intercept it. The orb touched the rock and erased it from existence. But it was a feint. While Naruto was looking up, Ashiki had appeared in front of him, his hand extended. Naruto met his palm strike, and the impact sent a shockwave that cracked the very floor of their arena. The Otsutsuki's physical strength was immense. The fight that followed was unlike any Naruto had ever experienced. It was a battle against physics itself. He launched a Bijudama, a condensed sphere of apocalyptic power. Ashiki, with a flick of his fingers, shrank it to the size of a pea, where it fizzled out harmlessly. Your power is meaningless if it cannot reach me, Ashiki stated calmly. Naruto sent his truth-seeking orbs after him. But Ashiki simply plucked them out of the air, shrinking them into tiny, harmless marbles which he then slipped into some unseen pocket dimension. He was disarming Naruto one weapon at a time. He tried taijutsu, closing the distance with his divine speed. But Ashiki's control of the battlefield was absolute. He would shrink the ground beneath Naruto's feet, causing him to stumble. He would shrink the debris around them into a hail of microscopic bullets, then restore them to their full size inches from Naruto's body, forcing him into a desperate defense. Naruto was in his most powerful form, a being of fused sage and divine energy, and he couldn't land a single clean blow. He was being toyed with, systematically dismantled by an opponent whose abilities defied conventional combat. Outside the barrier, the captains watched in horror. Senjumaru stood motionless, her Bankai still active, but her focus was entirely on the duel. Her analytical mind was racing, processing every interaction, every failed attack, every impossible defense. The great tapestry on her loom depicted the fight, a frantic dance of gold and white. Ashiki was a clean, sharp line. Naruto was a raging, chaotic storm that could never make landfall. She saw the pattern. Ashiki shrank everything: rocks, energy, weapons, the very space between them. But he never, ever, shrank Naruto himself. He dodged his physical strikes. He parried his blows. He used his power on Naruto's attacks, but never on his body. It was not a choice. It was a limitation. A single, critical flaw in an otherwise perfect defense. But how to tell him? The barrier was absolute. Her thoughts, her voice, would never reach. She needed a different path of communication. A private line. She focused her will, not on the battlefield, but on the white Haori Naruto wore. The one she had woven from the sun tree. Its threads were her threads. Its essence was connected to her own. It was a part of her, and through it, a part of him. With a surge of will, she began to weave, not in the real world, but conceptually. She sent a command down the spiritual link to the garment on his back. Naruto was on the defensive, narrow. Why dodging a forest of full-sized pillars that Ashiki had summoned from his dimension? He was frustrated, his immense power feeling useless, caged. Then, he felt a strange, tingling warmth across his back, a familiar sensation. Like the hum of Senjumaru's loom. He risked a glance at his reflection in a shard of polished, floating debris. On the inner, black lining of his Haori, a pattern was forming. The golden threads she had woven into it were moving, rearranging themselves. They were forming characters. Characters from his world. A simple, elegant line of text that only he would understand. It doesn't work on living things. The realization slammed into him with the force of a thunderbolt. The frustration vanished, replaced by a surge of pure, brilliant clarity. He had been trying to beat an unbeatable defense. But the defense had a hole in it. He looked at Ashiki, who was watching him with an expression of mild curiosity, wondering at his sudden stillness. A slow, dangerous grin spread across Naruto's face. "You know," Naruto said, his voice regaining its confidence. "You're right. Maybe I have been thinking too small." "Oh," Ashiki replied, intrigued. "Yeah," Naruto said, "I've been trying to throw rocks at you." He held up his hands. "Time to throw people." Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. With a series of explosions of smoke, a dozen copies of Naruto appeared, fanning out to surround Ashiki. Ashiki scoffed, a look of genuine disappointment on his face. "Clones. After all this, you resort to such a simple, brutish tactic. I am not some common shinobi to be overwhelmed by." He stopped. He raised a hand to shrink the nearest clone, to wipe it from existence. And nothing happened. The clone didn't vanish. It charged, its fist wreathed in golden energy. Ashiki's eyes widened for the first time. A flicker of genuine shock. He was forced to physically dodge, a quick, efficient sidestep. But another clone was already there, aiming a kick at his head. And another. And another. "What is this?" Ashiki demanded, now weaving through a barrage of attacks from all sides. "Why can't I?" "Because they're not just chakra." The real Naruto yelled, his voice booming with triumph. He had channeled his six paths power, his mastery over yin-yang release, into their creation. "I gave each of them a spark of life. They're not puppets, Ashiki. They're living beings. Your cheap trick doesn't work on living things." The god was thrown onto the defensive. He was a master duelist, his movements precise and deadly, but he was surrounded. He couldn't use his primary, overwhelming ability. He was forced to fight their way. A chaotic, multi-pronged brawl. For every clone he dispatched with a devastating kick or a well-placed elbow strike, two more would press the attack, their coordination perfect. Their goal not to win, but to pin him down. This was the opening. While Ashiki was locked in a furious melee with the living clones, the real Naruto gathered his power. He didn't form a Rasengan or a Bijudama. A projectile would be useless. He channeled all the power of his sage god form inward, condensing it, infusing every cell of his body until his skin glowed with a white-hot intensity. He became the weapon. 3 of his clones executed a perfect synchronized attack, grabbing Ashiki's arms and one of his legs, holding him in place for a single, crucial second. Ashiki snarled, a wave of force exploding from his body to vaporize the clones. But it was too late. Naruto was already there. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't aim a kick. He drove his entire body forward like a cannonball. His shoulder lowered, his form a perfect spear of divine energy. He was a living projectile. A being Ashiki could not shrink. He slammed into the Otsutsuki's chest. There was no explosion, just a sickening, solid crack that echoed through the silent arena. The sound of a god breaking. Ashiki's calm, aristocratic composure shattered. His eyes went wide with pain and disbelief. He was launched backward, a blur of white and black, and crashed through his own impenetrable barrier. The wall of force dissolved like smoke as its creator was sent tumbling through the air, finally coming to a stop hundreds of yards away. He floated there, clutching his chest. His pristine white robes were torn, and a thin trickle of crimson, divine, impossible blood, leaked from the corner of his mouth. His calm was gone, replaced by a look of cold, murderous rage. Naruto stood where the barrier had been, his living clones reforming around him. He was breathing heavily, the gambit having taken a massive toll. But he had done it. He had landed the first blow. He had taken the god's measure and found him wanting. The fight was no longer a lecture. It was no longer a game. It was a war, and the god could bleed. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. Heart of the Labyrinth. The sight of a god's blood was a catalyst. For the Otsutsuki forces, it was a shock that shattered their inbrai. Ned belief in their leader's invincibility. For the Shinigami, it was a surge of hope so potent it was like a physical wave of energy, bolstering their weary spirits. For Ashiki Otsutsuki, it was the ultimate insult. His cold, aristocratic rage was a terrifying thing to behold. It was not the wild, roaring fury of Kenpachi, but a focused, absolute killing intent that chilled the very air. The disappointment was gone, replaced by a simple, brutal imperative: extermination. You have made a grave error, boy. His voice seethed in Naruto's mind, no longer conversational, but laced with the venom of a wounded deity. You have mistaken my patience for weakness. I will correct that assumption. Then, I will flay the flesh from your bones and use them to build a new throne. The battle resumed, but the pretense was gone. This was not a debate. It was a brawl. Ashiki no longer relied solely on his shrinking ability. He met Naruto's taijutsu with his own, a style so ancient and refined it made the Hyuga's gentle fist look like a child's tantrum. Every strike was aimed at a spiritual pressure point, every block designed to disrupt the flow of energy. Black receivers, the signature technique of his clan, erupted from portals around him, a storm of deadly projectiles that Naruto and his living clones were forced to constantly evade. The celestial plane became a blur of gold and white, Elstrom of divine power clashing with primordial force. Naruto was pushed back, his sage god form holding, but the sheer ferocity of Ashiki's assault was staggering. He was no longer toying with his food. He was trying to butcher it. Yet, Naruto held his ground. He had the advantage of numbers, his living clones a constant, nagging presence that prevented Ashiki from focusing his full attention on the original. And he had something else, something Ashiki was beginning to realize with dawning fury. Naruto was enjoying it. The pressure, the danger, the sheer thrill of a battle against an opponent who pushed him beyond every conceivable limit. It was the world he was born for. You are still smiling, Ashiki snarled, batting away a clone with a backhand strike that sent it dissolving into golden light. Even now, facing your own oblivion, you find this amusing. I'm not facing oblivion, Naruto shot back, ducking under a sweeping kick and driving a knee into Ashiki's side. I'm facing you, and I've figured you out. You talk a big game about chaos and freedom, but you're just another bully who can't stand it when someone hits back. The blow landed, and for a second, Naruto thought he had him. But Ashiki's body seemed to absorb the kinetic force. He grabbed Naruto's leg, his grip like a vice, and spun, hurling him through the air. "You have not figured anything out," Ashiki said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low calm. He floated in the air, his torn robe swirling around him. The rage was gone, replaced by something far more terrifying: cold, calculated desperation. "You think this is about physical strength. You think this is a contest of who can punch harder. I have tried to educate you. To make you understand the philosophical necessity of my crusade. You have refused the lesson." He raised a hand, not to attack, but as if in benediction. "So be it. I cannot defeat the stubborn fool in the king's body. So, I will simply have to evict him." Naruto, recovering his balance in midair, felt a sudden, piercing cold. It wasn't an attack from the outside. It was a violation from within. Ashiki wasn't targeting his body anymore. He was targeting the throne. The office. The very essence of the Soul King that was now fused with Naruto's soul. A beam of pure, corrupting Otsutsuki energy, blacker than Aikibe's ink and laced with the sickly purple of a dying star, shot from Ashiki's palm. It wasn't fast. It moved with a slow, inexorable purpose. Naruto's instincts screamed at him to dodge, but he couldn't. His body was frozen, held in place not by a physical force, but by a conceptual one. The attack wasn't aimed at Naruto Uzumaki, it was aimed at the linchpin of the three realms, and the linchpin could not flee. The beam struck him square in the chest. There was no explosion, no impact. The black energy simply sank into him. It was like being injected with ice and poison. The brilliant gold of his sage god form flickered, and black, vein like patterns began to spread across its surface, a creeping corruption that extinguished the light. On the battlefield, everyone stopped. The captains, the royal guard, even the Otsutsuki soldiers, A.L.L. froze as they watched their king convulse in midair. He clutched his chest, his body arching in agony, a silent scream twisting his features. The golden aura that had been a beacon of hope was now being consumed by a vile, parasitic darkness. "What's happening to him?" Kenpachi growled, his bloodlust forgotten in the face of this horrifying turn. Senjumaru's eyes were wide, her placid mask finally broken by a look of raw, unadulterated fear. Her Bankai, the great loom in the sky, flickered, the tapestry depicting the battle beginning to fray at the edges as her concentration shattered. She knew what this was. A direct assault on the soul. A poison for the very concept of his being. The battle of the celestial plane was over. The battle for Naruto's soul had just begun. For Naruto, the world dissolved. The sounds of battle, the sight of the soul palace, the feeling of his own body, it all faded away, replaced by an endless, gray twilight. He was standing in a labyrinth. The walls were made of a shifting, smoky substance, constantly forming and reforming. The pathways twisted in impossible, Escher-like configurations. He recognized this place. It was a fusion of his own mindscape, the familiar, watery depths where he'd first met Kurama, and something vaster, more complex. It was the architecture of the realms he now held together. He was standing in the heart of his own soul, and it had become a prison. "Welcome to your kingdom, little king," Ashiki's voice echoed from the walls, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "The true seat of your power. Let me give you a tour." The wall to his left shimmered, and an image appeared. It was a small town in the American Midwest, at night. A family was huddled in their basement, crying, while the monstrous, cackling shape of a hollow tore their house apart above them. "This is Ohio," Ashiki's voice whispered. "One of the communities you sacrificed. Their protector was recalled on your order. Do you hear their prayers? They are cursing your name." The scene shifted. He saw Jiraiya, sinking into the dark waters of a megakure, a sad, proud smile on his face. "You could have saved him," the voice insisted. "If you had been stronger, faster, smarter. He died for your weakness." It showed him Neji, impaled, a bloody cough on his lips. It showed him his parents, their last loving look before the Kyuubi's claw descended. It showed him Sasuke, walking away from the village, his back turned. Failure after failure, loss after loss, each one a brick in the walls of this labyrinth. All of this pain, Ashiki's voice soothed, all of this guilt. It is a heavy burden. Why carry it? Let it go. Let it all go. A new image formed, the most painful yet. He saw Konoha, years in the future. He saw his friends, older, happy. He saw them gathered at Ichiraku, laughing over bowls of ramen. But he wasn't there. They toasted an empty seat, a sad, fond memory, and then the conversation moved on. Life had continued. The world he had died to save had saved itself and forgotten him. Your sacrifice was for nothing, Ashiki declared, his voice resonating with triumphant finality. They moved on. You were a ghost, a memory, Nging to a world that no longer needs you. You were the lonely warden of an empty prison. But I can set you free. Let the walls crumble. Let the chaos in. In the glorious rebirth, all of this pain will be washed away. You will be forgotten. But you will finally be at peace. Naruto sank to his knees in the heart of the labyrinth, the visions overwhelming him. The black, corrupting energy seeped into his spirit, feeding on his despair. The golden light of his soul dimmed, flickering like a dying candle. Ashiki was right. What was the point? He had given everything, and all he had in return was an eternity of loneliness and the ghosts of his failures. On the outside, his physical body shuddered violently, the last vestiges of his golden aura being swallowed by the blackness. He's losing, Kiryu Hakafuna whispered, her face pale. The king's soul is being consumed. Senjumaru watched, her heart a cold, tight knot in her chest. She could feel his spirit fading through her connection to his Haori. It was like a light being slowly extinguished. She couldn't fight Ashiki in his mind. She couldn't punch a concept. But she could not, would not, let him go. His mistake was believing he had to bear it alone. Her own words came back to her. This was not a burden he could bear alone. He needed an anchor, a lighthouse in the storm of his own despair. She closed her eyes, her eye dissolving into motes of light as she focused her entire being on a single task. She reached out with her consciousness, not with force, but with a gentle insistence. She followed the thread, the spiritual link she shared with the garment she had woven for him. It was a lifeline, a pathway directly into the heart of the labyrinth. She did not force her way in. She did not invade. She simply knocked, a gentle, persistent presence at the edge of his collapsing world. Inside the labyrinth, as Naruto was about to be completely submerged in the gray twilight of his despair, a single point of color appeared in the distance. A warm, crimson light, the color of a phoenix feather. It pulsed gently, a steady, rhythmic heartbeat in the chaos. He looked up, his spirit weary, and saw the light approaching. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't an attack. It was a figure, walking calmly through the shifting, nightmarish walls. It was Senjumaru. She wasn't wearing her elaborate robes or her royal guard uniform. She was in a simple, elegant kimono, her skeletal arms gone, her expression soft, her eyes filled not with pity, but with an unshakable faith. Ashiki's voice roared, enraged. What is this? An intruder. You cannot fight me here. Weaver. This is the domain of the soul. Senjumaru ignored him. She walked right through a horrifying illusion of a dying child and stopped in front of the kneeling Naruto. She didn't offer a grand speech. She didn't try to counter Ashiki's lies with her own truths. She just looked at him, her gaze cutting through all the pain and confusion. I am here, she said, her voice a quiet, undeniable reality in the sea of illusions. She knelt before him, reaching out her slender, pale hand. Your grief is not a weakness. Your sacrifice was not for nothing. It is the reason I am here. It is the reason they are all still fighting for you out there. It is the reason I have faith in you. Her words were simple, but they were the truth. A truth more powerful than any of Ashiki's twisted visions. He looked at her hand, then into her eyes. He saw no judgment, no disappointment. He saw only her, the woman who understood the weight of his crown, who had sat with him in his grief, who had woven him a shield for his battle and a message for his mind. I'm afraid, he whispered, his voice the raw confession of a lost child. I know, she replied, her voice soft but firm. Be afraid, but be afraid with me. We are wardens of a cage, you and I. But we will not be prisoners in it. Not while we have each other. She extended her hand further. Take my hand, Naruto Uzumaki. Come back. Her presence, her unwavering belief in him, was the one thing Ashiki's philosophy could not account for. It was not about power, or evolution, or chaos. It was about connection. It was about love. It was an anchor. He reached out, his trembling, fading, golden hand taking hers. The moment their fingers touched, the labyrinth shattered. A wave of pure, brilliant golden light exploded from their joined hands. It was not the chaotic energy of the Biju or the serene power of Sage Mode. It was the light of his own soul, his own indomitable will, rekindled and forged anew. The gray twilight was burned away. The horrifying illusions dissolved into dust. Ashiki's voice, which had been an all-powerful god's, became the shriek of a fading ghost. Less than no. This is not possible. Connection is a weakness. Sentiment is a flaw. Greater than. You're wrong. Naruto's voice boomed, no longer the voice of a confused king, but of a man who had faced his own heart and won. It's my greatest strength. The golden light roared through the last of the labyrinth, purging every last speck of Ashiki's corrupting influence. He felt Senjumaru's consciousness recede, her job done, leaving him alone and in control once more. On the celestial plane, Naruto's body, which had been moments from being completely consumed by darkness, erupted in a pillar of golden light so intense, so pure, that it drove back the Otsutsuki army and forced everyone, friend and foe alike, to shield their eyes. The black, corrupting energy was violently expelled from his body, turning to ash in the brilliant radiance. He floated in the air, his sage god form restored, brighter and more powerful than before. The battle damage was gone, his spirit reforged. He slowly opened his eyes. They were not just glowing with power anymore. They held a new, profound, and utterly unbreakable clarity. He knew who he was. He knew what he was fighting for. He looked across the battlefield at Ashiki, whose face was a mask of utter disbelief and fury. The internal battle was over. Naruto had won. Now, it was time to end the war. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. A New Dawn. The golden light that radiated from Naruto was not the chaotic, explosive energy of a weapon. It was the calm, steady, and absolute light of a star. It was the light of a soul that had faced the void within itself and had not only survived but had reforged its own core. He had been a candidate, a replacement, a function. Now, he was simply the king. Ashiki Otsutsuki, floating in the celestial air, his divine blood a stark crimson stain on his white robes. Looked upon this new form and for the first time in his ageless existence, he felt a flicker of something akin to fear. The boy was no longer a vessel for the linchpin's power. He was the linchpin. The fusion was complete. This changes nothing, Ashiki hissed, the words a desperate attempt to reclaim his own conviction. The cage is still a cage, no matter how brightly the warden shines. He gathered his power for one final, cataclysmic assault. The space around him warped, portals tearing open not to release soldiers, but to draw in raw, destructive power from his personal dimension. Asteroids, super dense and humming with kinetic energy, were pulled through. Spears of black, corrosive energy formed in the air around him. He was no longer trying to win a duel, he was trying to annihilate the entire Soul Palace in a single spiteful tantrum. If I cannot have the throne, his voice screamed in their minds, I will ensure there is nothing left but dust. The captains of the Gote 13 braced themselves, their bankai flaring back to life to meet the impending apocalypse. The royal guard moved to form a defensive line in front of the throne. But Naruto held up a hand. A simple, calming gesture. Stay where you are. This is my duty. He floated forward to meet the storm, his expression serene. He was not preparing a counterattack. He was not gathering energy for a final Rasengan. He was simply observing, his star-bright eyes taking in the full measure of Ashiki's rage. You're right, Ashiki, Naruto said, his voice calm and clear, carrying across the battlefield without needing to be shouted. You taught me something. The king's power isn't meant to be a weapon. It isn't a sword to fight chaos. It's a key. As Ashiki unleashed his final attack, a converging wave of physical and spiritual destruction that threatened to unmake the royal realm, Naruto acted. He clasped his hands together in a simple seal, a gesture familiar to his old life, but the result was on a scale that dwarfed any jutsu. He didn't erect a shield. He didn't teleport away. He reached out with his consciousness, connected to the very foundation of his office, and he turned the key. The obsidian floor of the Soul Palace. The air itself, the space between the floating gates, it all lit up with lines of shimmering, golden energy. It wasn't Kido. It was the raw architecture of reality, the blueprints of the realms, made manifest. An immense, three-dimensional sealing formula, with the empty throne as its anchor point, bloomed into existence, its complexity making Kianeri's pathetic ritual look like a child's scribble. Ashiki's apocalyptic attack slammed into this new reality. And it was simply absorbed. The asteroids dissolved into harmless particles. The spears of energy were unraveled, and fed into the glowing lines of the seal. The Otsutsuki's ultimate expression of destructive rage became nothing more than fuel for the king's ultimate act of order. What is this? Ashiki shrieked, his power being drained, siphoned away by the golden matrix. I told you, Naruto said, his eyes filled with a profound, weary pity. You see everything as a prison. But a prison is just a room without a door. You just have to know how to build one. Golden chains, woven from the conceptual light of the seal, erupted from the air around Ashiki. They were not physical. They were chains of law, of order, binding not his body, but his very existence. He struggled, but it was like a fish trying to fight the ocean. Naruto floated before him, the architect of his doom. I am the Soul King. And by the power vested in me, I sentence you, Ashiki Otsutsuki, to eternal confinement. You wanted chaos. You will have a cell of perfect, unchanging order. He pushed his hands forward. The golden matrix of light converged on Ashiki. Collapsing inward, the Otsutsuki god screamed, a sound of pure, impotent fury as he was compressed, his essence folded in on itself. A pocket dimension, a perfect, seamless sphere of absolute nothingness, formed around him. It was a prison built from the scraps of his own failed attack, sealed by the will of the king. You cannot. My will is freedom. My will is evolution. Ashiki's last, fading thoughts lashed out. Others will come. The cage will fall. Chaos is the only truth. The sphere compressed to the size of a fist, then vanished with a faint, final pop, taking Ashiki with it. Gone. Not killed. Sealed. Erased from this plane of existence, locked away in a timeless prison of his own making. Silence. The war was over. The remaining Otsutsuki soldiers froze. Their connection to their god severed. Their morale, their very reason for being, evaporated. They turned to flee, but the captains of the Gote 13, their spirits soaring, fell upon them like a righteous hammer. The cleanup was swift and brutal. Naruto's golden aura receded, the sage god form dissolving back into his normal state. The adrenaline fled, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that was both physical and spiritual. He swayed in the air for a moment, the cost of his final act hitting him all at once. Before he could fall, a flash of movement. Senjumaru was there, her usual composure slightly undone. A look of profound relief on her face. She caught him, her grip firm and steady, and for a moment, he leaned against her, the king finding his anchor. It's over, he whispered, the words tasting of victory and immense relief. Yes, she replied, her voice soft in his ear. You did it. The days that followed were a blur of reconstruction and reaffirmation. The Soul Palace was repaired, its otherworldly materials rewoven and reshaped by the members of Squad Zero. The Gote 13 returned to the Seraite as heroes, their stories of the celestial battle already becoming the stuff of legend. Naruto's first official act as the undisputed king was not a grand proclamation, but a quiet visit to the dungeons beneath the 1st Division barracks. Lord Kianeri, stripped of his fine silks and his authority, knelt in his cell. When he saw Naruto, he did not rage. He did not beg. He simply lowered his head to the floor. Your Majesty, Kianeri said, his voice a dry rasp. I was wrong. I was a fool, blinded by pride and fear. I saw a beast, when I should have seen a savior. My life is yours to take. It is the least I can offer for my treason. Naruto looked down at the humbled nobleman. He felt no anger, no need for vengeance, only a tired understanding. Get up, Lord Sazanami. Kianeri looked up, confused. I don't need your life, Naruto said. The Soul Society needs your skill. You're a politician. You know how to lead, how to command the respect of the other nobles. This world needs to heal. It needs to unite. Your punishment isn't to rot in a cell. It's to help me rebuild what you tried to tear down. Swear your fealty, and mean it this time. Help me build a world that is truly worth protecting. Tears welled in the old nobleman's eyes. Not of fear, but of a profound, shattering shame. And a flicker of something new. Hope. He had been offered not just mercy, but purpose. I will, he swore, his voice thick with emotion. I will serve the Soul Society. I will serve you, my king. Until my last breath. The nobility, their conspiracy broken and their leader now a fervent loyalist, fell in line. The whispers of dissent were replaced by murmurs of awe. The human king was not a tyrant. He was a leader. Weeks later, a semblance of peace had finally settled over the realms. The soul bleeds in the human world had ceased, the balance slowly, painfully, restoring itself. The reconstruction of the Soul Palace was nearly complete. Naruto stood on the balcony of his private chambers, the same one where he had knelt in despair. He looked out not at a cosmos in turmoil, but at the serene, silent dance of the distant nebulas. The immense pressure of the three realms was still there, a constant weight upon his soul. But it no longer felt like a crushing burden. It felt familiar, like the weight of a pack on a long journey. A soft rustle of silk announced her presence. Senjumaru came to stand beside him, her hands clasped before her. They stood in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the shimmering jewel of the Seraite twinkle far below. It's quiet, Naruto said finally. Peace often is, she replied. It's what makes it so valuable. He turned to her, a soft smile on his face. I couldn't have done it without you. In the labyrinth, you were my light. She looked down, a faint, uncharacteristic blush touching her pale cheeks. As I said, my faith is in the man. The king is merely a bonus. He reached out and took her hand. Her fingers, which could unweave the laws of reality, curled gently around his. The pressure of this job, it's still there. He confessed. I feel every soul, every joy, every bit of pain. I don't think that will ever go away. It won't, she said, her gaze meeting his, her sharp eyes soft. But a burden shared is a burden halved. Is that some ancient Soul Society proverb? He asked with a grin. No, she said, the corner of her mouth twitching in that rare, beautiful smile. It's just something I've learned recently. They stood there, hand in hand, as a new dawn broke over the Seraite far below. The immense, lonely pressure of the realms was still there, but it was no longer a weight that rested on one man's shoulders. It was a foundation upon which they would build a future. He was the sage king, the protector who had found his purpose. And she was the great weaver, the warden who had found her faith. They were two impossible beings from two different worlds, bound together by duty, by respect, and by a love forged in the heart of a cosmic war. The work was not over. The universe was vast, and new threats would always arise. But for the first time in a very, very long time, the king was not alone on his throne. And together, they would face whatever came next. Chapter 10 End.